Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and the War Within expansion, at least the pre-patch, is almost here. And with this expansion comes a huge amount of class changes, which I've been taking a look at over in the beta and the pre-patch, and I decided to document the entire list of everything that is happening to every one of our classes in today's video. It is a long one, so I'll have chapter links down below, so you should be able to bounce around between all the different classes that you're interested in as you're trying to figure out which class you go into main going forward. But this video I tried to be as detailed as I can with all the important changes, some of which are going to be mostly highlights when there's way too many things to talk about, but there are still a few playstyles such as Survival Hunter, for example, where I do go into details because there are specifics that I think you should know about before you dive into them for the pre-patch. Also, on the beta, we saw a pretty massive adjustment to all the different tanks, essentially nerfing them to make healers a little bit more interactive when it comes to healing them in group content such as dungeons and raids. However, last time I checked on the pre-patch notes, those changes were not in the pre-patch notes, but they still may end up making their way into the pre-patch of this expansion, so just be aware if your tank is feeling a little bit squishier, that means some of those changes did make their way in. Though the beta and the pre-patch builds have been very different in terms of changes, not all the beta changes are in the pre-patch on PTR, so there's a chance they may not carry over. Just be aware. I thought maybe I should mention it at the intro because I don't necessarily dive into the details of it on any of the tank specific changes. But with that being said, let's get into the biggest set of class changes that we're seeing for this next upcoming expansion with the pre-patch of the War Within, and how every single one of our favorite classes is being affected in just a handful of days. So, for this big ambitious video, let's start it in alphabetical order with the class of Death Knight, which I'm so excited for, as Death Knights have seen so many different talent changes overhauled to their general talents, but also the spec talents as well. There have been a couple of adjustments where they've actually seen a good portion of the performance talents adjusted so they're easier to pick up. Things such as your Soul Reaper, or even mobility talents like Wraithwalk, utility talents such as Asphyxiate, but also some of the other combat talents like Icy Talents buffed up by quite a bit, but also moved in better positions, with also things such as Unholy Bond as well. So you have a lot more of those combat benefits that you can pick up fairly easily, and you can't really go further down the talent tree without picking up these talents, which makes it much easier for you to really customize your Death Knight. One of the talents you will see that's removed out of here is the Rune Weapon buff that is now a Frost-only talent, but replaced with a lot more passive options with the Capstones. Another big change that you'll notice is Abomination Limb on its own has been adjusted where it's really good for the damage, really good for the pulling, but it no longer provides you with resources, defensive or combat resources depending on your spec. So Abomination Limb is mostly used for that grippy potential, but you could technically make a build without it if you wanted other talents that maybe have been better served you with certain boss fights and certain raid encounters where you don't necessarily need the grippy element. Another aspect of Death that has been adjusted is actually with their main rune abilities, as in the runes that you engrave in your weapon, specifically the Rune of Apocalypse. Hard to tell if this one will actually get any use, but the way that this rune works is it causes your ghoul, primarily good rune for Unholy Death Knights, to apply diseases, a variety of different benefits, or debuffs rather, on the enemy target. Some of the debuffs that the ghoul is able to provide is things like Pestilence, which is a dot that has been amplified by 500%, so the dot effect is a lot more effective. Another benefit is going to be War, which is a stacking debuff that actually causes the Death Knight to do more damage to that target. Also, all of these debuffs can continue stacking, but it's kind of random which ones you get from the ghoul. Another one is Famine, which has been made stronger, where the ghoul can now reduce the damage dealt to the Death Knight by quite a bit, which has some defensive elements to it, or Death, which can reduce enemies' healing taken as well. So if you're playing Unholy and you play with a ghoul, there are other benefits that the ghoul can provide. From testing, these rune particular wasn't really what a lot of players spec'd into, but this offers some unique opportunity for Death Knights, maybe in dungeons, maybe in PvP, maybe in raids, to find a way to utilize it if you end up investing heavily into your goal as part of your main mechanic. Other quality of life changes include IBF being reduced down to a baseline 2-minute cooldown, which is super nice. Cleaving Strikes, which is where you pop Death and Decay, and the next few abilities, depending on the spec, will be able to cleave targets. When you move out of Death and Decay, you actually retain this bonus for 4 seconds, which is huge for specs like Frost, Unholy, and Blood in order to keep that cleave value. Also, certain defensive talents such as Blood Draw have been adjusted, so they're a little bit stronger and they happen once every 2 minutes, which makes it a little bit better. But besides this, we had a bunch of new capstones such as Vestigial Shell, which allows anti-magic shell to be granted to 2 nearby allies for a lessened effect. Above that is Subduing Grasp, where when you pull an enemy, you now actually reduce the amount of damage they do to you for a few seconds, which makes it a little bit easier for, let's say, Blood Death to take a brunt of damage, also not completely put himself in danger by grouping something terrifying and scary next to you. Things such as null magic help it reduce the amount of magic damage that you take, as well as reduce some of the harmful effects against you. Talents like Osmosis increase your overall healing while AMS is active, and Unyielding Will does increase the cooldown of AMS, but causes it also to remove all magic effects from you, kind of like a Cloak of Shadows type of effects that rogues currently have, which is a nice adjustment for Death Knight, and overall gives you a lot more room to play around with your capstone and as well as general talent options. The Blood Death Knight talent tree didn't really change too much in terms of shape, but the position of a lot of your talents have been adjusted by quite a bit, and there's going to be a couple of things such as Rune Tab being a little bit easier to access over here, as well as an adjusted Gorfians, which is a bit off to the side. Gorfians, out of all the talents, probably saw the biggest adjustment, where it's a lot easier to pick up because of its position, but also now it has a silencing effect when you use it, but also a shorter cooldown with Tightening Grasp, so Gorfians may actually end up getting play in Mythic Plus dungeons. Besides this, we've seen other talents such as Bone Collector. Whenever you grip enemies, you now can refresh your shield, which is going to be a huge portion of your overall defensive benefits. So gripping enemies and is kind of rewarded in a way to be able to make the Death Knight actually stronger as part of your tanking mechanics. The talent of Ossified Vitriol is another new one, and whenever you lose a Bone Shield charge, the damage of your next Morrowind is increased by 15%, stacking up to 75 times, or 75% rather. So you have quite a bit of extra value for Morrowind in pure single target as you lose Bone Shield charges. And there's a couple of different ways that you can now lose Bone Shield charges more aggressively. You have talents such as Tombstone, which didn't get a lot of changes, but Tombstone goes into talents such as Shattering Bone. And below that, Bone Storm, which actually now consumes your Bone Shield charges and starts refunding you those charges until all of them are refunded. But for every single one of those Bone Shield charges, it deals more damage and therefore more healing. This cooldown reduction of the Bone Shield charge consumption actually does benefit things such as Ossified Vitriol, but also cooldown reduction of your Dancing Rune Weapon to make it come back a little bit quicker. So now there's a little bit more interesting functionality with your Bone Shield charges as a Blood Death Knight. Another new talent is going to be Bloody Blade, which gives you a little bit more parrying effects, where parrying an attack grants you charge of Bloody Blade, increasing your strength by a little and up to 4%. At 8 stacks, your next parry will consume all charges to unleash a hard strike at effect at an increased effective value, and increases your strength by 10% for 6 seconds, which is actually a very popular talent over on the beta. Another set of talents that saw huge changes has been Consumption and Blood Drinker. Blood Drinker still a very good single target heal, but now has a debuff mechanic where it reduces enemies' damage done to you by 15% after you channeling the ability and while you're channeling it, giving it a bit of more better single target defensive value. With the talent of Consumption, you strike enemies all out in front of you, healing yourself a portion of the damage, but it also causes your Blood Plague damage to occur much more quickly, which provides you with additional overall healing. Both of these talents can be amplified with the talent of Carnage. Each time an enemy strikes your Blood Shield, the cooldown of Blood Drinker and Consumption have a chance to be completely reset. From there, we move on into the Frost Death Knight talent, which isn't all that different, at least at first. It has quite a few new adjustments in the capstones, but right before that, there have been some other adjustments over here towards the middle rows as well, such as the Frost Scythe ability has gotten buffed up by quite a bit. It now has a pretty hefty cooldown that can be further reduced by consuming Killing Machine procs, but the initial upfront damage of this ability is a lot higher, and Frost Scythe now does quite a lot of damage in all situations. Pillar of Frost is an ability that's no longer ramped up in strength. Instead, it provides you a big bulk of strength for 12 seconds. It also has a set 1 minute cooldown, and if you want to reduce it further, Ice Cap reduces it by 15 seconds at most. But with Pillar of Frost, you're able to get yourself a lot of upfront power, and you can start using most of your big hard-hitting abilities, such as, let's say, your Frost from Fury immediately as soon as you press your Pillar of Frost, allowing you for better overall outward burst. Frost Death Knights also saw a ton of capstone challenge adjustments, from Bone Grinder that leads into Obliteration. We now have a talent of Arctic Assault. Consuming Killing Machine procs fires free Glacial Advance at your target, which is quite powerful. We have an auto attack talent row with Smothering Offenses, where auto attack damage is increased. This amount is further increased for each stack of icy talents you have on your Death Knight. So the more icy talents you stack, the better your auto attacks are doing, which supports a dual wield build. Below that is Icy Death Torrent, where your auto attacks, critical strikes, have a chance to send out a sleet of ice doing quite a bit of frost damage to the enemy target. This damage while Pillar of Frost is active on your auto attacks when they crit can extend the duration of Pillar of Frost by a few seconds up to 6 seconds maximum. Going further from the talent of Avalanche, below that we have Shattering Blade, which allows your Frost Strikes to consume 5 stacks of Razor Ice to increase its damage. And below that is a new option called Shattered Frost. When Frost Strike consumes 5 stacks of Razor Ice, a portion of its damage is then dealt to all nearby enemies, which allows for like a Frost Cleave type of scenario. This damage does have a soft cap of 8 targets. Finally, on the right hand side, we have Icebreaker, which heads slowly into Breathless and Dragosa. On the way there, we pick up a new talent called Hyperrexia. Your runic power spending abilities have a chance to additionally deal 45% of the damage dealt over 4 seconds, which is quite powerful. Together with Breathless and Dragosa, which has recently been buffed up by 25% to make sure that this capstone does not fall behind some of the other options, which gives Death Knights quite a few ways to talent out their builds and really pick the talents that you would want to kind of invest into, offering a two-handed playstyle, but also a dual wield playstyle, or something that's kind of like works in between, where a dual wield playstyle can feel closer to that of a Bursty Obliteration while have a lot of the runic power value increases. For the spec of Unholy, we did see a bit more of a holistic adjustment when it comes to your overall talent layout. It is familiar, but a lot of the talents can be found in very different spots than before. First things first, Sudden Doom, which would normally make a Death Goal or Epidemic free, it instead only makes it cost 10 less runic power, but also guarantees it to be critical striking and allows the ability to also proc your Festering Wounds whenever this effect does occur. This allows your runic spending abilities to have a bit more of a weave-in playstyle, especially if you end up investing heavily into the Festering Wound playstyle specifically. For the spec of Unholy Death Knight, a bunch of your talents and abilities have had their CD reduced or adjusted to a specific number, with a lot of the cooldown reduction talents completely removed and replaced with new options. So things such as Army of the Dead is a locked in 3-minute cooldown, Apocalypse 45 seconds, Dark Transformation for your main goal 45 seconds, and even Vile Contagion also 45 seconds. Besides this, we've seen some actually massive restructures for some of the talents and how they function, such as being able to replace Army of the Dead with Raise Abomination, which has a 1.5-minute cooldown that allows you to raise a big A-bomb instead of an army of little ghouls that has a bit of better job of applying Festering Wounds to multiple enemies and spreading virulent plagues, while having more focused damage with a much shorter cooldown. With the Sound of Decomposition, your virulent plagues have a chance to abruptly flare up, doing additional damage to targets, but also whenever this effect does proc, your active minions uptime does get increased by a few seconds. On the same row as Summon Gargoyle, in a choice node, we now have a talent of Doom Bidding, where Consuming Sudden Doom now calls Mages of the Dead to assist you for 8 seconds. This can be paired together with Medicine Mages, where your mages can now fire volleys at multiple targets, which is a tier set that has now become a talent that allows you for additional cleave and AoE damage. Talents such as Unholy Blight are now more passive. Whenever you press Dark Transformation, there's now a Vile Swarm that surrounds your ghoul, causing your ghoul to spread all of your dots actively, which makes the rotational gameplay of Unholy Death Knight a little bit less GCD heavy. Talents such as Defire no longer grant you Mastery. Instead, the ability itself is just a beefier version of Death and Decay, as it does significantly more damage. So if you want to use Defile just for the raw damage output, you now can do so without having to play around the Mastery stacking elements. With the talent of Festering Scythe, you can now transform your Festering Strike into a Festering Scythe after you pop 20 Festering Wounds, which has more of a cleave frontal benefit, which applies multiple Festering Wounds on enemies in front of you, which allows you to really weave that Festering Wounds and commit to a Festering Wound playstyle a little bit more aggressively. Finally, the talent of Festermite has been adjusted, where popping a Festering Wound increases your strain by 2% for 20 seconds, though you no longer increase this until 20 seconds are up. Instead, you can have multiple variations of Festermite, multiple strength benefits overlapping at once, instead of losing all of these stacks after 20 seconds and having to rebuild it back up. So it's kind of like a rampy thing that you have to maintain at all times if you want to get the most benefits out of it. And with that, we have the next class, which is the Demon Hunter. Though sadly to say, Demon Hunters have barely got any changes, at least when it comes to the pre-patch content update. You will have some updates once the hero talents are enabled, but the class talent tree, as well as the spec talent trees for both Havoc and Vengeance, didn't really see a lot of changes, and by that I mean barely any. Like Sigil and Misery duration has been reduced a little bit down to 15 seconds from 20 seconds, but that's really about as many changes you will see, at least when it comes to the spec of Havoc. Besides the global tank reductions we're seeing for this expansion, we do see some adjustments to Vengeance, specifically with the talent of Illuminated Sigils, which has now been limited. Sigil of Flame now has a 5-second reduced cooldown and 1 additional charge, where this talent used to give you an extra charge for every sigil. You now get a bonus sigil only for the Flame Sigil, which reduces the amount of crowd control that you can pull off as a Vengeance Demon Hunter. From there on, we move on to the class of the Druid, which has gotten a lot of good updates as of this expansion, where the class challenge tree is seeing quite an overhaul. Couple of things to note here: they removed a lot of the 2-point and even 3 talent point nodes. There's only a handful of the 2 points that can be found towards the bottom rows, but for the rest of it, a huge portion, except for maybe Killer Instinct and Natural Nurturing Instinct, a lot of them are a single talent point, which gives you a lot more freedom in how you can customize the Druid. So if you want to pick up things such as Skull Bash, it's a lot easier for specs such as Restoration Druids to grab it. If you want to pick up Cyclone, if you want to pick up some range extension or Natural Influence, if you want to play more of a Cat Weaving or a Owl Weaving type of Caster Weaving Resto, you totally can. And there's quite a lot of opportunity for hybrid potential. Even down the middle, we have a couple of adjustments with things such as Soothe and Stampeding Roar move towards the center to become a lot easier for you to spec into them. Besides this, some of the more important highlights are going to be things such as Fluid Form, an awesome talent that allows you to passively shift into forms based on the abilities you use. So with Fluid Form, as a rested Druid, you can press Shred or Rake outside of cat form, and those abilities will shift you into cat form while also letting you use those abilities instantly. Mangle can shift you immediately into Bear, and things such as Wrath and Starfire will instantly shift you into Moonkid form if you end up using hybrid benefits, like if you need to hop in a Bear form for all those extra little defenses that you can now gain as a Balance Druid in Mythic Plus, for example, and then you immediately start casting Wrath in order to do damage. It'll instantly shift you into Moonkid form, which is a much needed convenience improvements for the class of Druid. From there on, we can move on into the spec of Balance Druids, which for the most part didn't really see too many changes to the talent tree, but the core of the Balance Druids has been adjusted a little bit. So some of the baseline changes, first of all, is your base combat ability and base damage output of a Balance Druid is being increased, but they're also trying to wean Druids off of their cooldowns to be less CD reliant. So a lot of the passive baseline abilities, such as all base abilities increased by 6%, that's happened. Wrath, Starfire, and Shooting Star damage has been increased by 15%. Wild Mushrooms buffed by 25%. Denizens of the Dream buffed up by 50%. But the astral power generation of certain abilities has been adjusted a little bit, with things such as Wrath reduced from 8 astral power to 6, Starfire from 12 to 10, New Moon from 12 to 10, Half Moon from 24 to 20, Full Moon from 50 to 40, Fury of Elune from 48 total during its full time down to 40, so you are going to be generating your resources just a little bit slower. Your cooldowns, however, has also been quite nerfed too, with Celestial Alignment reduced in duration from 20 seconds to 15 seconds. Incarnation, which is the upgraded version of this, goes from 30 seconds to 17 seconds. And your Mastery has also been nerfed by roughly 17%. Also, certain talents such as Orbital Strike have been adjusted with the damage nerfed by 25%. However, on the competing talent choice between Orbital Strike and Greater Alignment, you can now choose between a shorter cooldown of Celestial Alignment or Incarnation, or a much stronger version of Celestial Alignment, which lasts a little bit longer if you do want to play heavily into that 3-minute cooldown, which also increases the value of the eclipses while you're inside of that window as well. So it's kind of like shorter cooldown but less effective, or a far more effective but a much longer cooldown commitment. With this, we also got a ton of new other talents that have been added into the Balance Druid talent tree, things such as Stellar Amplification, where Star Surge increases the damage the target takes from periodic effects, as well as Shooting Stars by 20% for 5 seconds. Reapplying this effect can extend the duration of this debuff by up to 20 seconds, which leans into more dot-focused gameplay. Talents such as Touch of the Cosmos allow casting Wrath in Eclipse to have a 12% chance to make an next Star Surge free, or casting Starfire within its Eclipse has a 15% chance to make an next Starfall free. With the talent of Harmony of the Heavens, Star Surge and Starfall increase your current Eclipse's arcane or nature damage by up to 5% maximum. And with the talent of Umbral Inspiration, whenever you consume Umbral Embrace, which is the talent right above it, whenever you do consume it, it increases the damage of your Moonfire, Sunfire, Stellar Flare, Shooting Stars, hours, and Starfall by 30% for 6 seconds, which can give you a moment of that damage over time intensity increase, which can play into other talents also. From there on, though, we can now move on into the Feral Druids, which have seen quite a few adjustments. The talent tree doesn't look all that different, but the feel of Feral is definitely going to be overhauled by quite a bit, which is primarily on the resource economy of a Feral Druid, which is getting toned down by quite a bit. So if you enjoyed Feral feeling fast-paced, you are going to see a notable slowdown with the pre-patch update, primarily from the target's Fury ability, which no longer resets with the talent of Predator. So there's no way for you to keep resetting target's Fury for instantaneous energy. Instead, you now have a 30-second cooldown of target's Fury, which you need to maximize every 30 seconds, so you have a bit more consistency on how often you get to use that ability without resets, which is definitely going to be slower. And for many of you that have been playing Feral, you will find this change jarring, so just expect it. Though Feral is seeing a bunch of other improvements to be a little bit stronger. They want Feral to have a slower paced gameplay without reducing your overall damage, so you are being reimbursed in a variety of different ways. Things like your Mastery now supports all periodic effects as well as bleeds, so if you want to, let's say, invest heavily into Moonfire gameplay and maybe go Lunar Inspiration, you now can do so in order to buff up the damage of other periodic effects, not just your bleeding effects. For Feral Druids, they've also adjusted the way that you deal with AoE damage, where previously you would utilize the ability of Primal Wrath in order to spread bleeds to multiple targets and then consume those bleeds with every single Wrath. But now they're actually changing it so that you're now going to be more focused on biting in order to deal AoE damage. Because Rampant Ferocity is now going to be your main AoE mechanic. You no longer consume your bleeds, but your bites are going to be more involved as part of your AoE. The damage of this ability in particular has been buffed by quite a bit, and it allows you to, whenever you spend energy on versus bites, to deal damage by up to 50% to nearby targets affected by RIP. Also, Catform abilities no longer have an extended range. You are going to have to move in a little bit closer into the melee range in order to be able to reach a target, but that is a thing that's happening to a lot of other melee classes, though it will be pretty noticeable on a Feral Druid. Besides this, we have a bunch of other talent adjustments, such as Sabretooth now being a debuff rather than a buff. Instead of being a buff that empowers all of your dots, instead is a debuff that's put on a specific target, which has a little bit more of the single target focus. One of the talents that could buff up Berserk is Heart of the Lion, which gave you cooldown reduction based on resources spent. That whole resource mechanic has been adjusted and it now caps it at 60 extra seconds. So most you can do for Berserk is to reduce it down from a 3-minute cooldown to a 2-minute cooldown. Previously, you could adjust it a little bit shorter than that to maybe closer to a 1.5, but now there's a bit of a limit on just how Berserk works. Certain talents such as Dreadful Bleeding have been buffed and now increase your rip damage by 20%. Also, the damage of all finisher moves for Feral Druid has also been buffed by 10%. This includes things like Maim, but also Rampant Ferocity, since it's technically a finisher, quote unquote. The damage of basic abilities such as Shred, Rake, Swipe all have been increased by 10%. And the instantaneous damage of Primal Wrath has been increased by 50%. Direct damage from your Thrash ability has also been amped by 30%, and Berserk has been adjusted to have a 15-second duration, which is lower than before. Incarnation has now also been capped, very similar to Balanced Druids, where it used to have a 30-second duration down to 20-second duration. Though now Berserk increases all attack and ability damage, as well as auto attack damage by 10% whenever you use it, to make this cooldown a little bit more impactful. From there, we got Restoration Druids, which are also going through quite a bit of an adjustment. You have things such as Swiftman becoming a based on ability, no longer someone needs to be selected from the class talents or anything that needs to be selected in the spec talents. You also do lose out on the playstyle of Adaptive Swarm completely, though there are new talents in order to help supplement playstyles that are more hybrid focused rather than resto focused. From the healing side of things, we got a few new talents such as Thriving Vegetation, which gives Rejuve a bit more of an instantaneous healing property. Talents competing with Verdant Infusion on the right hand side is going to be Prosperity, which can increase your Swiftman to 2 charges total. Flourish will now share a talent point and choice node with Photosynthesis, which makes Restoration Druid a little bit less cooldown heavy, which is one of the things they're trying to do with Restoration, though majority of your healing abilities have been amplified by quite a bit to make Resto Druid less reliant on their CDs. The talent of Tranquility has also been amped by 400% in smaller groups, specifically 5-man content, with its healing scaled downwards the more allies you add, basically becoming more or less the same within raid content, but a lot better in smaller 5-man dungeons. To finish off Druids, we finally have the spec of Guardian, which has seen not a lot of specific Guardian changes, and you'll notice majority of your talent trees, as they are right now, are mostly familiar as would be for the pre-patch event, though you will see some notable upgrades once you get access to both of your hero talents once the expansion officially launches. The Guardians can still gain a lot of benefits from their actual class talents, and there's quite a bit of hybrid capability and utility to be added into your overall kit. From there on, we get to move on to the class of the Evoker, which got a few class changes within its class talent tree, primarily positional adjustments for a lot of their talents. Things such as Renew and Blaze move towards the middle, since it is almost like a must-have talent in most situations, swap places with things such as Source of Magic. In your capstones, you got a new option for all 3 specs, either Time Spiral, which provides your allies with extra movement on a 2-minute cooldown, but now you can also get Spatial Paradox, previously an AUG only healer buff that is now a capstone for all 3 specs of the Evoker. With a 3-minute cooldown, it'll basically allow a friendly healer as well as you to cast your abilities while moving, while also increasing your range by 100% for 10 seconds, which is a huge improvement when it comes to Evoker utility that is no longer a unique thing that only AUG can bring, which does make dev and even preservation a little bit better. From there on, alphabetically, we can move on into the spec of Augmentation, which got a few new quality of life improvements. With Augmentation, we got a new talent of Arcane Reach, which is a passive that does help some of your helpful spells to gain a little bit extra range on your abilities. So if you're not a huge fan of that short range for an Evoker, but want to get a little bit extra reach, Arcane Reach is a nice talent to include as part of your talent kit. Another benefit that has been added for Evoker recently is a talent called Sense Power, which allows you to gauge the magical energy of your allies, essentially showing you whoever has the cooldowns active. So instead of having to get a weak aura or an add-on to track all of your party cooldowns, you can now activate Sense Power and it will automatically start sensing whether one of your allies has cooldowns rolling. They actually whitelisted a lot of spells and abilities as part of Sense Power, so it can tell you pretty regularly whoever has any major CDs rolling, so you can now know who you need to buff with your Ebonite or Prescience, which I think makes it a little bit easier for newer players getting into Augmentation, trying to get better at Augmentation and performing better as this playstyle. From there on, AUG actually got a few new talents in order to help create a bit more build variety. We have a bit more damage focused talents such as Rumbling Earth, which causes upheaval to leave an aftershock dealing additional damage. This effect kind of works off of Accretion, which allows Eruption to reduce the main cooldown of upheaval for a little bit more burstier and aggressive playstyle. To further amplify that aggression, going off of the talent of Infernal Blessing, we have Molten Embers, where Fire Breath causes enemies to take 20% increased damage from all of your black Dragonflight abilities. When you take a look at all your Evoker abilities, they all have some kind of a color associated with them. Expunge being green Dragonflight, your Renew and Blaze being a red Dragonflight ability, and a lot of your offensive abilities as well as buff abilities of the Augmentation being the black Dragonflight abilities. So essentially, Upheaval, your Eruption, as well as other abilities can now be amplified by 20%, giving you a much more burstier and damage-focused profile rather than one that's focused on buffs. Together with talents such as Imminent Destruction, Breath of Aeons reduces the essence cost of your Eruption by 1, increases damage, which can give you a much better burst window. Another set of talents that have been adjusted is Modes of Possibility in order to help unlock a little bit more of this capstone option with Overlord. With Modes of Possibility, Eruption has a chance to form a Mote Diverted Essence near one of your allies. Whenever an ally comes in contact with a mote, they get a random buff from their assortment of augmentation buffs, which can be things such as Prescience, these can be things such as Ebonite, but also some of the smaller buffs such as Symbiotic Bloom, which can provide your allies with a lot more Evoker buffs spread across an entire party or a raid team. For the spec of Devastation, we've seen some of the biggest updates for this spec that they needed desperately for a while now. And that is, this will be surprising because this is actually an aggro reduction for the spec specifically. So Devastation as a spec is one that can get some snap aggro immediately, literally better than some of the other tanks in the game. Things such as Pyre do a ton of AoE damage. Abilities such as your Fire Breath could do a ton of group buy damage. And with your Mastery that amps up all of your abilities when you're hitting a healthy target, it means that you're doing a ton of upfront damage. So what they did is actually reduce the amount of aggro both Pyre as well as your Fire Breath ability can pull at the very beginning of a pull, which is It's such a weird change because I don't think we've seen any kind of adjustments with aggro and damage for abilities for DPS classes in a very long while for a few expansions, so it's hilarious that it's happening here for Dev, but it's a huge quality of life change. Just not being dead within 5 seconds of an opener when running into a trash pack while all the cooldowns are going off is such a nice thing for Dev, and it's a must-have feature for this class. From there on, we got a ton of other talent adjustments for Devastation specifically. Some of those are there to help bolster a more red-based playstyle, because a lot of Evokers have been going Shattering Star and then Cleave playstyle around the blue-based abilities, but they wanted to make those red abilities such as Firestorm a little bit better. So Firestorm now scales with haste and has a bit better range in terms of the amount of explosive value that it can create with its rain of fire. Other supporting talents for Firestorm such as Snapfire have also been improved, where Pyre and Live Flame have a chance to cause your next Firestorm to be cast instantly without triggering its cooldown. It does mean that you will still essentially get a second charge of Firestorm that can be placed instantly, but it doesn't mean that it kind of reduces the cooldown of Firestorm at all. This does make Firestorm-based gameplay and proc-based Firestorm a lot better when it comes to AoE and even in single target situations. As with the talent of Feed the Flames, after casting 9 Pyres, the next Pyrestorm will explode into a Firestorm. In addition, Pyre and Disintegrate deal additional damage to enemies that are under your Firestorm effect. We have talents such as Imminent Destruction, which has also been buffed up, where Deep Breath now reduces the essence cost of a Disintegrate and Pyre by 1, making them a lot more spammable, and increases their damage by 10% for 12 seconds after you land, which makes it much easier for you to implement. As with the Spec of Preservation, we're seeing more thematic changes with this class specifically. On the right hand side, you can see a lot of the abilities are more bronze inspired, right? There's a little bit of timey-wimey magic, kind of time dilation effects to them. The left hand side is more focused on the green Dragonflight spells and just raw burnt out healing, but the middle has never really had too much of a theme to it, and they wanted to make it more red Dragonflight themed with a couple of talent adjustments, things such as Lifebind are now found in this row, as well as Lifegiver's Flame, as well as Life Force Bender. Though we do have new talents such as Titan's Gift, which allows you Essence Burst to increase the effectiveness of those Essence abilities by 25%, as well as the previously a Ray tier set, but now a talent of Life Spark, where Reversion has a chance to cause your next Living Flame to be cast instantly and deal 50% healing or damage, and this effect can stack up to 2 times, which transforms Preservation with a capstone that a lot of players found influential, and it's a much needed thing for Preservation going forward. Besides this, we're also seeing buffs to talents such as Temporal Compression, where each cast a bronze spell causes your next empowerment spell to reach maximum level in 10% less time. This is a buff from what it was before, stack it up to 4 times, which allows you to fire off your empowerment abilities much quicker. With the talent of Time in Need, the effectiveness of this talent now procs at 30% health instead of 20% health, which makes it a little bit more consistent. And as with all healers, your ability of Dreamflight, which is a raid-wide healing cooldown, now becomes a lot more effective when it comes to using it in 5-man groups, which makes it a lot easier and better within Mythic Plus content. Also, abilities such as Emerald Blossom, a very small adjustment, but the ability itself, the mana cost of Emerald Blossom, has been reduced by 15%, which makes a Blossom-focused raid build a lot easier to pick up, especially if you're dealing with mana problems in the past. Now, another class that also seen a number of quality of life changes is the Hunter, and they needed it. They sorely needed it. With the general changes as well as spec changes, there's a lot for us to take a look at and go over. If you're a Hunter going into this pre-patch, definitely take a close look at every single one of these talents. There's one too many for me to name, but I'll go over the most important highlights to mention here early on. Some of the biggest highlights are going to be things such as that are a lot easier to pick up. A lot of the talents that you have, things like your Charge Trap, your Trank Shot, Misdirection, your Kick, your Wall, some of your stunts, your Explosive Shot, as well as some of the other utilities are positioned in a way where it's a lot easier for you to pick up those talents, and it's very difficult to make a Hunter build that doesn't have a lot of the utility. Plus, the cost for many of these abilities have been adjusted, besides things like Keen Eyesight, as well as Trigger Finger, which are a little bit more offensive and performance-based talents. Only a few of them though. There's a lot more talents for you to invest in however way you wish in your class tree, so definitely experiment with it when you get to play with it. Some of the more important stuff you all should know though is Wall, Survival of the Fittest, can now have 2 charges with padded armor, which is a huge survivability increase for the class of Hunter in general. You can also get a shorter cooldown with it with Lone Survivor, which not only reduces the cooldown as well as duration, increases the duration of survival of the fittest, but also reduces the cooldown of your interrupts, which gives hunters a bit of a shorter interrupt, especially great for a melee hunter, which gives you a 13-second cooldown, which is quite nice. You will notice that a lot of the offensive power of the class tree has been mostly removed, with things like Death Chakram no longer here towards the bottom row. Instead, the only thing you really have that every spec gets access to is Explosive Shot. Explosive Shot, as well as the Blackrock munitions and Keen Eyesight for the extra crit chance, as well as Trigger Finger for the extra pet damage and your personal attack speed increases. All of those things are the only thing that you really were going to be able to get that's like a performance damage oriented. A lot of those have been transferred to Survival, Marksman, and Beast Mastery, which we'll take a look at in just a second, but this gives you a lot more options to just itemize your character with a bunch of utility options. Your capstones are a little bit different now, with Unnatural Causes buffing up your damage over time effects. Down the middle you have High Explosive Trap or Implosive Trap, which is kind of like a high explosive trap, which instead of knocking enemies away from the trap, it instead knocks enemies up into the air, which is a huge convenience. On the left hand side we have things such as Emergency Salve, where Feign Death and Aspect of the Turtle can now remove poisons and diseases, which can be incredibly good in certain dungeons, and in this expansion there are going to be some instances that are a bit more disease and poison heavy. As for the specs themselves, we'll start off with Beast Mastery, and you'll see that if you haven't seen their talent tree at all, you'll think, oh wow, that's a bit of an overload. It's a little bit more packed. There's a lot more abilities in between, and there's a lot of things for you to pick from when it comes to your overall playstyle, and I assume there's going to be a lot more choices for you, opportunity rather, for you to be able to itemize and customize your overall build. Some of the highlights, however, because there's a lot for us to take a look at, is things like Beast Cleave becoming one single talent point, which means you can spend your talent points everywhere else. That's a huge quality of life improvement right there. Beast Mastery is going to have a lot bit more opportunity to be a more dot heavy, so you'll have more ways to bolster your playstyle. Besides just spamming your kill commands and barb shots, you'll now be able to invest more heavily into those dots, specifically with things such as Hunter Spray, which allows you to gain kill shots to be able from your kill commands, which can then progressively build into other things such as Venom's Bite, where kill shots will now apply Serpent Sting for 18 seconds. You can also further amplify those dot heaviness with Explosive Venom, where after 5 casts of Explosive Shot or Multi-Shot, you will then apply Serpent Sting to all targets hit. With talents such as Basilisk Collar, each damage over time effect against a target causes you and your pets to deal 5% more damage per dot, which is a significant gain. On the opposite side of the talent tree, we have things such as Barrage, which you would think you would not really use a Beastmaster Hunter, but this ability now grants you Beast Cleave, so it is in a way kind of encouraged to be used at least in AoE content. Murder of Crows as an ability also makes its return. Every 5 casts of Kill Command will now apply Murder of Crows that will deal physical damage over 15 seconds, even more dot heaviness. If you want to play into a Dire Beast type of playstyle, a Summoner build, there's a bit more talents that can support this a little bit more, like Dire Beast, which upgrades all of your summoned pets, but also further down Huntmaster Skull, which allows you after every 3 casts of Dire Beast to summon an empowered pet with a Horn of Valor, either Haughty or Fenrir, to battle. Haughty will increase all damage all of your pets do by 8% while they're active, while Fenrir will pounce on your primary target, inflicting them with a heavy bleed that also grants you additional haste. As for the capstones, you'll see the Call of the Wild as well as the Bestial Wrath and all its empowerment talents are mostly the same. We did see adjustments to Bloodshed though, which has a bit of a dot bleed kind of mechanic to it, because this talent can be further upgraded with either Shower of Blood, where Bloodshed now hits 2 nearby targets for Cleave, or Venomous Bite, where Bloodshed now increases all damage taken from your pet by additional 15%, and Kill Command that deal 20% increased damage to the enemy target. As for the spec of marksmanship, we also see a ton of new changes. There's some familiarity here, but there's also new elements, such as penetrating shots, which gives you even more crit value, where you gain critical strike damage equal to 40% of your critical strike chance, so investing heavily into critical strike chance can also increase your overall damage. But some of the more wackier and more unique talents can be things such as Phantom Hammer, which allows rapid fire to shoot additional shots. This could also go into talent of Barrage, which under most circumstances isn't all that exciting, but when upgraded with Rapid Fire Barrage, Barrage will now instead shoot rapid fires at your targets and up to 4 nearby enemies at 30% effectiveness, and its cooldown is increased by 40 seconds, but it can now benefit from things such as trick shots, where every single one of those rapid fire bullets also ricochets, which creates for a very nice bursty situation. Sadly though, I'll have to report the talent of Lone Wolf still exists, as marksmanship is going to be encouraged to run without a pet as much as possible. In pure single target situations, however, there may be some elements where you might want to run a pet, but Lone Wolf I think is still going to be basically a must-have within dungeon content. Though, even if you talent for things such as intimidation, you can still use them without a pet as marksmanship, so just because you don't have a pet does not mean you're locked out of certain talents. When it comes to capstones, we did see a few adjustments for marksmanship. On the left hand side is the familiar Legacy of the Windrunner talent with the Wind Arrows mechanic. That Wind Arrow mechanic can be upgraded into Wailing Arrow, which is more passive. After summoning 20 Wind Arrows, your next aim shot becomes a Wailing Arrow, which has the shadow damage, additional AoE damage, and the silencing effect and interrupting effect whenever you cast it. But with it being off of Wind Arrows, you actually get a lot more uses out of Wailing Arrow. Further down we have Readiness, where True Shot grants you Wailing Arrow guaranteed, and you now generate 2 additional Wind Arrows while in True Shot. Wailing Arrow resets the cooldown of Rapid Fire and also generates 2 charges of Aim Shot as well, which gives you even more burst capabilities. On the right hand side, we see a couple of different choices, such as a Focused Aim, which allows aim shot and rapid fire damage to be increased by 5%, which isn't exciting, but talents further below it are more interesting, like Small Game Hunter. Multi-shot deals more damage, and explosive shot deals additional increased damage for better AoE, which eventually goes into Salvo, which is a little bit more familiar. On the right hand side we have the talent of Volley, and further below that is a more interesting talent which some of your marksmanship hunters from the days of Shadowlands will actually appreciate. With Kill Zone, your spells and attacks deal additional 8% increased damage and ignore line of sight against any targets standing in your volley. So if you want to utilize this in PvP to keep hitting a target that is hiding behind a pillar, they can't escape you just with line of sight anymore, which is a very interesting and a fun talent for marksmanship specifically. Finally, we have the spec of Survival, which for the most part has been a bit of a meme spec for a couple expansions now, but they're really taking an effort to make it a viable and a playable melee class going forward. And the amount of changes they've given to Survival and the amount of love they've done for the spec has been absolutely out of this world. So one of the bigger changes, just to make sure that you are aware that they are focused on making marksmanship actually good, is a change to the Survival Hunter Mastery. The mastery now reads Spirit Bond. You and your pet deal 22% increased damage, scaling off your mastery, and you take 3% reduced damage. This bonus is increased by 100% when you're within 25 yards of each other, making mastery an actual really good stat to invest into, which is what a lot of hunters on the beta have been doing recently. Mastery not only increases the amount of damage you do, but also reduces the amount of damage that you take, especially with you being melee. You're putting yourself in danger quite often, being so close to bosses and adds. So for Survival, that's a huge stat investment within crit, haste, mastery, and versatility being a little bit more even, but it only begins there. From there on, we have talent changes like Tip of the Spear, where Kill Command now increases the direct damage of any other spell by 15%, stacking up to 3 times. Using an ability consumes 1 of the charges of Tip of the Spear, so you can bank up to 3 of them, but every ability only uses 1 charge at a time, which is a huge benefit, which allows Tip of the Spear or Kill Command to buff the damage of abilities such as Wildfire Bomb or Explosive Shot or Flank Strike or Raptor Strike or Mongoose Bite, or things such as your Fury of the Eagle. And there's a lot of abilities that can be amped up by Tip of the Spear, which gives you a bit of a playstyle where you want to Kill Command, then use an ability, Kill Command, use an ability intermittently, and try to manage your focus as best as possible. Further from there, we can upgrade it with Flanker's Advantage, where Kill Command has an additional 10% chance to immediately reset on its cooldown, and Tip of the Spear damage bonus is increased by 30% based on your critical strike chance. So the more crit you have, the more effective this talent essentially is going to be, which is an interesting mechanic that makes crit an even better stat going forward. From there on, to go over Survival Hunter talents, I really would want to kind of talk about how you can pair certain talents, because a lot of them can be kind of interwoven with one another fairly easily. You get basic things such as Kill Command, your Wildfire Bomb, your Raptor Strike, but from there, how you interweave these talents can be very, very interesting. For instance, when you pick up the talent of Quick Shot, after casting Kill Command, you have a chance to fire off a Arcane Shot at a target. Then you can further upgrade it so with Sulfur-lined pockets, where after 3 quick shots, your next quick shot is replaced with an explosive shot that's at 100% effectiveness. Exposure shot and kill commands and Mongoose Bites and your grenades can have a bit more of a value with one another. Mongoose Bite, Raptor Strike have a 10% chance to reset the kill command's cooldown. Kill command reduces the cooldown of Wildfire Bomb. Wildfire Bomb damage is increased by 5% with Grenade Juggler and has a 25% chance to cast an explosive shot at your target for free at 100% effectiveness. Explosive shots also can reduce the cooldown of Wildfire Bomb by 2 seconds. And when you pair it together with Ranger, now you have a much more heavy range playstyle that buffs up the damage of Arcane Shot, Steady Shot, Explosive Shot, as well as Serpent Sting and Kill Shot. Talents such as Butchery are still there to help reduce the cooldown of things such as Wildfire Bomb. However, you can further augment them with Merciless Blows, which allows you, after casting Butchery, to make a next Raptor Strike or Mongoose Bite hit multiple targets, which gives you even more AoE potential. If you want to take it one step further, pressing Flanking Strike now has been a little different. It now costs 15 focus instead of generating focus. It also grants you a bunch of procs of Tip the Spear all at once. But with Exposed Flank, after casting Flanking Strike, it now strikes 2 additional nearby targets at 100% effectiveness and exposes the weakness in the enemy's defenses, causing your kill command to hit 2 additional enemies for the next 10 seconds. Investing heavily into Mongoose Bite or even just Raptor Strike allows you to pick up talents such as Viper's Venom, where Raptor Strike and Mongoose Bite apply Serpent Sting for free on your target. With talents such as Contagious Reagents, reapplying Serpent Sting on a target that also has it spreads it to 2 nearby targets, and when you pair it together with Merciless Blows that causes it to cleave, you can spread your dots on multiple targets very quickly. With the talent of Outlaw Venom, each damage over time effect on a target increases the critical strike damage they receive from you by 2%. Talents such as Sikkim allow Kill Command to be used a lot more regularly. Casting Kill Command has a chance to reset the cooldown of Kill Shot, making it usable on any target regardless of health, and strikes up to 2 additional targets. This chance is doubled during your Coordinated Assault, which also got a few changes. Coordinated Assault is now a burst damage window that causes you and your pet to charge at the target doing physical damage and amplifies the damage of you and your pet by 20%. There's no more Kill Command pet auto attack interactions, it's just a flat 20% damage buff. While Coordinated Assault is active, Kill Command chance to reset is increased by 15%. Coordinated Assault can then be further amplified with talents such as Relentless Primal Ferocity, where Coordinated Assault sends you and your pet into a stage of primal power. For the duration of the assault, Kill Command generates 1 additional stack of Tip the Spear, and you gain 10% increased haste, and Tip the Spear damage bonus is increased by 50%, which makes it a lot more burstier. Or you can go with Symbiotic Adrenaline, where the cooldown of Coordinated Assault is then reduced by 60 seconds down to a minute, and Coordinated Assault grants you 3 stacks to Tip the Spear immediately. You can further add Bombardier to Coordinated Assault. Whenever you cast Coordinated Assault, you gain 2 charges of Wildfire Bomb, which makes you a lot more explosive heavy. And Coordinated Assault, when it ends, your next 2 shots of Explosive Shot are free and have no cooldown. Lastly, we have the talent of Spearhead, which has also been adjusted to be more single target focused. It gives your pet the signal and your pet charges at the target, bleeding him for a bunch of damage over 10 seconds, increasing your chance to critical strike that target by 30% for 10 seconds. With the talent of Deadly Duo, the cooldown of Spearhead is reduced from a 1.5 down to a minute, and Spearhead Bleed now also causes your critical strike damage against that target to be increased by 30%, which overall I think gives you a better idea of how linked a lot of these talents are and how they can play off of one another, offering Survival a much bigger variety of talents that you can now invest into, with some capstones that are a lot more crucial and a little bit more focused, with, let's say, the Fear of the Eagle being more AoE heavy, while Spearhead being more single target, with Coordinated Assault being kind of something you would want to invest into no matter which build you end up running. And with that, we can now move on to the class of Mage, which has also seen a ton of changes as of this expansion update. The first one is going to be the biggest one, which I think is a massive quality of life improvement. Mages no longer play around double bloodless windows. Instead, now you have a choice between Time Anomaly, which is random procs of things like Time Warp, Clear Casting, Spec procs for Fire and Frost, as well as your main abilities like Arcane Surge, Icy Veins, or Combustion. Or you can go with Inspired Intellect, which allows Arcane Intellect to grant you, personally, additional 3% int. From there, the class talent tree didn't really see too many changes. You'll see it's very familiar if you played Mage before. You do see some adjustments, like down the middle you have Dragon's Breath, or a choice between Supernova, available to all 3 specs. The duration of things such as Mass Polymorph has been reduced down to 15 seconds from 20 seconds. But also things such as Ring of Frost and Ice Nova now share a slot within its talent tree. And they have a couple of new talents such as Barrier Diffusion, which allows whenever one of your barriers to be removed to reduce the cooldown of your prime barrier by 4 seconds. But also adjustments where like Mass Barrier becomes a 3-minute cooldown. This, however, may not come out the same on PTR because PTR build is going to be a little bit different than beta build. Over in the beta, Mass Barrier is a 3-minute cooldown. On PTR, it may come down to be a 2-minute cooldown, but just be aware if it is a 3-minute cooldown, then that is intent to change because beta class changes are still a little bit of work in progress. From there, we can move on to Arcane Mages, which has seen a bunch of different convenience changes with a lot more abilities being added. Barrage ability also becoming a baseline thing you no longer have to talent into. Your Arcane Orb also being baseline, which is also really, really nice. And from there, you see a lot of the nodes in the spec tree for your Arcane Mage. There's not too many 2-point nodes. There are some here with Prodigious Savant as well as Arcane Delimitation, but for the most part, it's a lot of 1-point costs, which give you a lot of variety of how you can customize your overall build. Some of the more notable arcane changes for the talents are going to be Nether Precision, which can now be consumed by either Arcane Blast or Arcane Barrage, which gives you a little bit of AoE or single target value either way you slice it. Arcane Familiar now has a bit of a different animation, so whenever you buff yourself, you now get an actual familiar, more of a D&D style. So instead of being like a Orb of Arcane, now you can have a little Raven. It still kind of stays with you, moves with you, so it's not super interactive or anything, but it just has a different model to it. The Arcane Familiar can be further amplified with Energized Familiar, where during Arcane Surge, your Familiar now fires 4 bolts instead of 1. Damage from Arcane Familiar has a small chance to grant you additional maximum mana, which helps you play a little bit better with your overall resources. On the right hand side, we have a couple of new talents such as Static Cloud, where each time you cast Arcane Explosion, its damage is increased by 25%, and this bonus resets after reaching 100% value. Further down, we have other talent choices such as Dematerialize, where spells empowered by Nether Precision cause the target to suffer additional damage over time, so a little bit of a damage over time effect. With Energy Reconstitution, damage from Dematerialize has a small chance to summon an Arcane Explosion on its target's location at 50% effectiveness. Arcane Explosions summoned from Energy Reconstitution do not generate arcane charges. On the left hand side, we have talents such as Big Brain, where gaining clear casting increases your intellect by 1% for 8 seconds, and multiple instances of this buff may overlap. For our capstones on the left hand side, we have a bit more thematics involved, with Arcane Delimitation opening up this Arcane Missile playstyle, where damaging a target with Arcane Missiles increases the damage they take from Missiles, Barrage, and Blast by 1% for 6 seconds, though multiple instances of this may overlap. With Aether Attunement, every 3 times you gain clear casting, you gain Aether Attunement, causing missiles to cleave up to primary target and 4 nearby targets at reduced effectiveness. With Talents of Time Loop, whenever you apply a stack of Arcane Delimitation, you have a 10% chance to apply another stack of Arcane Delimitation, and this effect can proc off of itself with a bit of randomness. To cap it off, we have High Voltage, where damage from Arcane Missiles has a chance to grant you an Arcane Charge, giving you a playstyle where you focus on using missiles in order to generate as many Arcane Charges as possible. This chance is increased by 10% every time you don't get a missile charge or missile to generate you an Arcane Charge, so there's a bit of a bad luck protection, which can then feed into Enlighten and goes into Arcane Harmony, which reactivates an Arcane Harmony, missile-focused Arcane Mage playstyle. On the right-hand side, though, we have a little bit more focus on Nether Precision with Prodigious Savant, where Arcane Charges further increase Mastery's effectiveness for Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage. To the right of that is Concentration, where Arcane Blast has a small chance to make your next cast of Arcane Blast free for mana purposes, or Lay Sight, where Nether Precision damage bonus can be increased by 30%. With the capstone of Lay Drinker, where consuming Nether Precision has a 20% chance to make your next Arcane Blast or Arcane Barrage echo, repeating its damage at 60% effectiveness to primary target and up to 4 nearby enemies for a bit of cleave. And in the middle, we have more ways to upgrade Touch the Magi to make it even better, with things such as Improved Touch the Magi so you accumulate more damage, or Arcane Echo so that the Touch the Magi can radiate whenever it takes an instance of arcane damage. And further down below, we have 2 choice nodes, either Nether Munitions. When Touch of the Magi detonates, it increases the damage all affected targets take from you by 8% for 12 seconds, or Magi's Spark. Your Touch of the Magi also comes with a spark, causing the damage from your next Arcane Barrage, Blast, and Missiles to echo for 100% of their damage. Upon receiving damage from all 3 sources, the spark explodes, dealing even more arcane damage to all nearby enemies. From there on though, we get to move to the spec of Fire, which has even more thematics involved. The talent tree looks similar, but it's actually quite different in terms of all the different choices that the mage now has access to. And when going over this talent tree, I'll mostly focus it on thematics first, as there's a lot of talents to take a look at, but I feel like once we talk about thematic options, you'll kind of see exactly what I mean. Because fire mages essentially can customize their playstyle in multiple different ways. Like if you want to support better cleave, you can pick up the talent of Lit Fuse, which is how now you can proc living bombs. Consuming Hot Streak has a 50% chance to grant you Lit Fuse. Your next Fire Blast turns up to a few enemies into living bombs that explodes, spreading living bombs to multiple targets, and that is essentially how you apply a living bomb in this update. From there, you can buff a living bomb through a variety of different factors such as Sparking Cinders, where living bomb explosions have a small chance to increase the damage of your next Pyro Blast or Flame Strike. Talents such as Explosive Ingenuity, your chance to gain Lit Fuse when consuming Hot Streak is increased, and living bomb damage is amplified by 25%. With Convection, when Living Bomb expires and it only hits a single target and doesn't spread, it reapplies itself at 100% effectiveness, though Living Bomb can only benefit from this effect once. With Mark of the Fire Lord, Flame Strike and Living Bomb apply Mastery Ignite at 100% increased effectiveness. Further below that is Explosivo, where casting Combustion grants Lit Fuse and Living Bomb's damage is increased by 50% while under the effects of Combustion. Your chance of getting Lit Fuse is increased by 30% while the effects of combustion is active. With a Blast Zone, further upgrading Lit Fuse to now turn 3 targets into living bombs, and living bombs can now spread to 5 nearby enemies. Phoenix Flames is another talent that can also be upgraded through a variety of different methods, such as Majesty of the Phoenix. When Phoenix Flames damages 3 or more targets, your next 2 Flame Strikes have their casting reduced and their damage increased by 20%. With Ashen Feather, if Phoenix Flames only hits one singular target, it deals 25% increased damage and applies Ignite at 150% effectiveness. With From the Ashes, Phoenix Flames damage is increased by 15% and direct damage spells help reduce the cooldown of Phoenix Flames by 1 second. Further upgraded with Phoenix Reborn, when your direct damage spells hit an enemy 25 times, the damage of your next 2 Phoenix Flames is increased by 100% and the refund a charge upon use. The talent of Scorch can then be further upgraded either with improved Scorch to give a Scorch more of a debuff mechanic or raw damage increase with Scald, but you can also get random procs of Scorch with Heat Shimmer. Damage from Ignite has a 5% chance to make your next Scourge have no cast time and deal damage as though your target was in a execute state. Even main mechanics such as Ignite can then further be amplified with things such as Inflame, where Hot Streak increases the amount of Ignite damage that Pyroblast or Flame Strike can do by 10%. Or Master of the Flame, where Ignite deals additional damage, or while Combustion is not active, Fire Blast will spread Ignite to 2 nearby targets of Combustion. Or Master of the Flame, where Ignite deals additional damage and can spread it easier whenever you have Combustion active. But also talents such as Controlled Destruction, where damaging a target with Fire Blast increases the damage it receives from Ignite by 0.5%, stacking up to 50 times. Though some of the bigger changes that you'll see with Fire Mage are going to be in the capstones of either Sun King's Blessing or Unleash Inferno. With Sun King's Blessing, it now takes 10 Hot Streak procs in order to gauge yourself a Pyroblast or a Flame Strike that are non-instant cast that will proc Combustion for 6 seconds, so it's going to take a little bit longer in order to obtain Combustion procs. With Unleash Inferno, while Combustion is active, your Fireball, Pyroblast, Scourge, and Phoenix Flames deal 60% increased damage, or additional 35% damage for your Flame Strike, and single target abilities help reduce the cooldown of Combustion by 1.25 seconds, though for Flame Strike, it is 0.25 seconds for each critical strike, up to 125 depending on the number of enemies hit, which allows you to invest more into Flame Strikes if you want to, either with the talent of Flame Patch, or maybe with Quick Flame if you're looking for more instantaneous damage. And lastly, Fire Mages get a little bit more value in the Execute rotation with Molten Fury, where damage dealt to targets below 35% health is increased by roughly 7%. Though from there on, we get to move on to the spec of Frost, which, unlike Arcane and Fire, didn't get nearly as many changes. Frost, for the most part, retains a lot of its familiarity, which is a good thing or a bad thing depending on you, but you won't really have to relearn the spec completely all over again. However, they did get a couple of new talents, things such as Permafrost Lances, where while Frozen Orb is active, Frozen Orb increases Lance's damage by 15% for 15 seconds, which gives you a little bit more Ice Lance value. On the left hand side, we have more of a thematic talents with Faction Frost, focusing on Frostbolts and cleaving multiple targets that pairs together with Death's Chill. While Icy Veins is active, damaging an enemy with a Frostbolt increases your spell damage by 2%, stacking up to 12 times, which allows you to build up a damage proc buff with your frost bolts while they cleave multiple targets with things such as Fracture Frost, and allows you a much bigger burst window. On the right hand side, we have some changes to Ray of Frost, which can now be split. You could either pick up Cryopathy or Splintering Ray pretty easily as a Frost Mage. You can either pick up both of these talents together to have Cryopathy increase Splintering Ray damage, or if you just want to focus on one or the other, you could do so as well to better optimize your spec. So for the class of Monk, we see a lot of new and exciting class talents. There's quite a lot of good options on the table for them. Most of them are not really power increases. There are a few depending on the spec. Like for example, as a Windwalker, you can pick up passive Jade Statue that could drop from your Zuen, though a good portion of this performance talents have been reworked into the Brewmaster, Mistweaver, and the Windwalker talents. However, when it comes to Monk, there's quite a lot of good utility choices, survivability choices, and even defensive choices. There's a lot on the table, but a lot of the core things such as Spear, Hand Strike, Transcendence, Ring of Peace, your defensives, as well as some of the healing components, all of those are a lot easier to pick up with some brand new options and utility like Reductions to Snare. But also we have some fun capstone choices down the bottom. I guess there's Fatal Touch, which does improve your overall damage when you touch a death and kill something, but then you have things such as Lighter Than Air. So if you end up rolling, after you roll, you get a buff where if you double jump as a monk, you move a short distance. Just a little dash, but it's enough for you to be able to cross certain distances and get around a little bit easier. This could also allow you to move out of a mechanic and then dash back in because it follows where you're facing as a monk, which provides you with additional mobility. Then there's classes or abilities such as Clash, which are kind of mobility, kind of like a Death Knight grip thing where it forces the enemy and you to meet together and charge at one another. So this can be used to kind of disrupt an enemy cast, to interrupt them, or just if you want to grip an enemy and move an enemy closer, you can. Then there's defensive choices such as Flow of Chi, which scales with defensive value as your health gets lower. From there on, we got the spec changes with Brewmaster in particular. For Brewmaster, the most of the talent tree is about the same. There are some new options such as Elixir Determination, which is kind of like a cheat death shield that procs whenever you get to 40% health. There's also scales in power depending on how much stagger you've recently purified. We have talents such as One with the Wind, where there's a chance whenever you dodge, thanks to your Mastery of Elusive Brawler, you may sometimes not consume all of the stacks, letting you dodge multiple times over. And talents like August Blessing, where if you are top after full health and you get healed, there's a chance you convert that healing, or rather you do convert that healing into healing over time based on 40% of your critical strike chance to create a heal over time effect. So if you do get healed with a bursty heal, you just keep benefiting from that heal afterwards to make sure that almost none of it is wasted. Certain talents such as Improved Version of Purifying Brew, Improved Version of Celestial Brew, all of those quality of life things have been added baseline to some of these abilities, so you know, like I have to put 2 talent points to make those abilities a lot more powerful. We also get some adjustments in your capstone choices with things such as Press the Advantage and Weapons of Order being a choice node that you can pick up Chi Surge and Call to Arms separately if you wish. Another capstone choice right here is going to be Ox Stance, which allows you whenever you purify Stagger as a monk, it allows you to gain charges of Ox Stance. The more stagger you purify, the more charges you get. When you take damage that is greater than a certain threshold of your health, normally it's 60% but can be reduced down to 40, you then consume those stagger charges or those Ox Stance stacks in order to stagger the amount of damage that you're taking. As a monk, normally you take a portion of the damage straight to your health bar, and then a portion of it goes into the stagger, which is like you take that damage and you kind of delay it so that you still feel it, you just will feel it over time. So monks normally take majority of the damage to the face, some of it goes to the stagger. What this does is if an ability does end up hitting too high when you health bar, you end up staggering or offsetting more of it into the stagger, taking less to the health directly, but increasing the pool of stagger greatly. Though with monks, you can purify that stagger pretty quickly, which can help you ease up some of the pain that you take. Then we have the spec of Mistweaver Monk, where for Mistweavers, for the most part, we're seeing the ability of Essence Font completely gone. So the way that you heal in AoE is going to be a little bit different. You have tools such as Invigorating Mist when you apply Renewing Mist on everybody and you press Vivify. Vivify now heals every ally with Renewing Mist with some scaling beyond 5 targets. Then we have abilities such as Zen Pulse, where Renewing Mist heal over time has a chance to cause your next Vivify to also trigger a Zen Pulse on its target, and all allies with the Renewing Mist, healing them For a set amount, increased by 6%, per Renew and Miss active up to 30%. So basically all that AoE healing is now transferred to using Vivify to get both value from Zen Pulse as well as your Renew and Miss value. Besides this, Mystery, we've got a couple of new talents such as Deep Clarity. Whenever you pop one of your Thunder Focus Ts, you guarantee get Zen Pulse next time you use it. If you're playing with the talent of Jade Bond, you can now get a bit more Mastery healing from your Red Crane, or a lot more Soothing Breath healing from your Yulon. The ability of Jade Fire Stomp now triggers a Mastery heal rather than a Essence Font heal, so it makes your Mastery a lot more effective as an ability. Mistweavers also have a talent of Refreshing Jade Wind, which procs now from using Focus T, so T is going to be a lot more involved as part of your basic gameplay. And then we have the talent of Pull and Miss, which allows you to collect 3 charges of Renew and Miss maximum, plus reducing the cooldown of your Rising Sun Kick. Using Rising Sun Kick helps cool down your Renew and Miss, so you can get them back a little quicker. The ability of Revival as well as Restoral, which are basically the same button just with different things that they cleanse, both of them have been buffed by 400% within smaller groups. So inside of a 5-man party, these abilities heal for a ton more, and they scale down the more allies you add to your heal, so essentially kind of rounding out at the 40 or 20 player mark within Mythic rating. Revival, however, has also been changed where it'll now dispel 3 magic effects from allies instead of all magic effects. This is specifically for RBGs where Mistweavers have a lot of AoE cleanse potential, and they kind of wanted to limit them, but in raids, I don't think it should really matter super much for them either. We also got another adjustment for your Renew and Miss, which can be modified either with Lotus Infusion. Allies with the Renew and Miss will receive 8% more healing from you, and Renew and Miss duration is decreased, so it's better for longevity heal and for group healing. Or if you want burst healing, Chi Harmony. For the first 8 seconds after casting Renew and Miss, that target will take 50% more healing from the monk, which is the Dragonflight tier set added as a talent option. From there, we have Windwalker monks, which have gotten adjusted a little bit, specifically when it comes to their resources. Windwalker monks are going to be a little bit more starved for chi and energy. Certain abilities, such as your Tiger Pump, for example, have gotten a bit more expensive, costing 60 energy. You also did have some reductions in terms of abilities that could generate you chi. For example, things such as your Expel Harm no longer is a button that you press, it actually procs with your Tiger Palm and no longer generates chi. Even abilities such as Chi Burst no longer generates Chi. So your resources and how you spend energy and manage your Chi is going to be a lot more important. Previously, so if let's say you've been a monk and you've been playing Dragonflight and you're not really great at managing resources, but you felt like you had no problems with it, you're probably going to struggle with Windwalker a lot more. But if you've had experience with Windwalker and you understand the management and efficient generation and spending of both chi and energy, you'll probably be just fine. But if you were somebody who was over generating your chi way too much, pressing Tiger Palm too rapidly and not really managing your chi energy type of rotation, you're probably going to feel this one a lot more. Though proper play is essentially going to mean that you're going to have a very flawless rotation, but it's going to be a lot more important to practice it than before. Haste, however, also gains a lot more value as a Windwalker. So haste is something you actually want to stack because there's abilities that will not scale off of haste, but haste also improves your energy, which is going to be huge. You got a lot of new talents for Windwalker, and I definitely recommend for Windwalkers to go and take a look at their talent tree because it's completely different, but here are some of the main important highlights. We have things such as Momentum Boost, which actually amplifies Fist of Fury to have its damage scale with haste, and Fist of Fury does more damage each time it pulses with its frontal. You also gain auto attack speeds after your Momentum Boost, which does include your auto attacks being part of the gameplay opportunity here. Your Rising Sun Kick also puts a debuff on the target, making you do more damage to them, and that debuff can overlap. It has a 12-second duration, so you can stack it up very quickly. When it comes to your offensives, Storm, Earth, and Fire is your primary way you do damage besides Zuen, so you no longer have a choice between Storm, Earth, and Fire and Serenity, so you'll have to get used to playing Storm, Earth, and Fire. Some of the more good talents that got a lot of play in the beta have been Flurry of Zuen, which is a random proc that does a lot of frontal damage. With the slowdown of the monk rotation, you are going to get a lot of benefit out of Flurry of Zuen, which also procs guaranteed with a Zuen. The ability of Strike of the Windlord got a lot of buffs, which can proc Rushing Jade Wind. It can also proc Thunder Fist, where your auto attacks generate additional nature damage. Combines really well with Momentum Boost auto attack benefits. You also have Gale Force, which also causes enemies hit by a Strike of the Windlord to have a chance to be struck for additional nature damage. And you can also reduce the cooldown of Windlord and have it do 80% more damage. On the left hand side, we have a lot of other options and synergetic talents like Energy Burst, which allows you, when you consume Blackout Kick procs, to have a 100% chance to generate chi. You can also generate those from sequence strikes. Whenever you consume a Dance of Chi G, you get a Blackout Kick proc. Using abilities such as Whirling Dragon Punch and with some of the upgrade talents like Revolving Whirl, Whirling Dragon Punch can lead into a free Spinning Crane Kick, which can lead into a free chi from Energy Burst, which is another way that you'll be able to generate a lot of resources through careful play. Conversely, you can always buff up the damage of Whirling Dragon Punch by 20%, have it grant you 4 stacks of Teachings of the Monastery, with Ichigo Monastery now upgrading to 8 stacks maximum, Teachings being the buff that empowers your Blackout Kicks. Then we have things such as Last Emperor's Capacitor. As you spend chi, you empower your Crackling Jade Lightning, which you never use as an ability, but after you get 20 stacks of it, it actually does quite a lot of damage. You can further upgrade Last Emperor's Capacitor with Power of the Thunder King, so now it cleaves multiple targets. Certain talents, such as Invoker's Delight, have actually had their haste pulled back a bit, so haste, again like I said before, becomes a much more important of a stat. You can also still play into Jadefire Stump, or if you want a more passive option, Jadefire Fist allows you to proc Jadefire Stump after completing your Fist of Fury channel, so if you want it to be more passive, you can. This ability can then be further upgraded with familiar talents such as Jadefire Harmony, as well as things such as Singular Focus Jade, which is better for single target, or Path of Jade, which is better for AoE and cleave. Up next, we have the class of Paladin, and for Paladins, unlike a lot of the other classes, we didn't really see nearly as many generalized talent changes. For the most part, it's very familiar, though where we had a Retribution Aura, we now only have Crusader Aura. Essentially, the only raid buff Paladins can bring right now is Devotion Aura, with Retribution Aura gone. This may mean you may actually want to run less Paladins within your raids in order to at least meet all of the different raid buffs, but it also does make it a little bit harder to insert a Red Pally into a comp. Normally, most raids will end up getting Devotion Aura from a Holy Paladin because you can combine it together with Aura Mastery to gain the full effectiveness. So getting a spot for Red specifically is no longer close to a guarantee. I guess technically you could have run Prot Paladin with a Retribution Aura also, but for Red Aura, it just made sense for Red to run Red Aura and have one in a raid as well. As for big palette changes, we got ourselves adjustment to Holy Paladin, which have lost the ability of Glimmer. You no longer glimmer allies with the healing over time. Instead, your support skills and your burst heals are a little bit more empowered, as Holy Paladin, for the most part, is a spot healer. You're not necessarily there to put hots on everybody and evenly heal the entire raid. You're kind of focus heal a singular ally that really needs a lot of healing, and you're extremely efficient at it, better than other healers. And they're really leaning into that for Holy Paladin for the War Within. So Holy Shock Healing got an amplified quite a bit. Word of Glory, Light of Dawn all got amplified by a bit. Hell, even whenever you get the proc of your Divine, or rather not Divine Revelation, but rather your Infusion of Light, even your Holy Word ability, or rather your Holy Heal of the Holy Light, that has also been increased by quite a bit in terms of its overall frontal healing. It is a lot stronger than before. It does quite a bit now, and even though it's still very, very mana hungry as an ability, it is a lot more effective as an overall heal. With all of your base healing being increased, some of the reliance on cooldowns such as Tear's Deliverance has been downplayed a bit, and they have nerfed Tear's Deliverance by roughly 15%. Another set of talents, for the most part, Holy Paladin talents didn't really change too much, but a few of them did, like Ladder of the Martyr. Ladder of the Martyr allows you, while above a certain health threshold, to increase the amount of healing your Holy Shock does, increased by 35%, but it also creates an Absorb Shield on you for 30% of the amount healed that prevents Beacon of Light from healing you until it has been dissipated. Essentially gives you like a bit of a necrotic effect, and you can heal through it fairly easily, but if let's say you are healthy and your ally isn't, you're getting a little bit more value from those flash heals, or Holy Shocks rather, from Ladder of the Martyr. With the talent of Bestow Light, it amps up the value of Light of the Martyr by increasing that threshold to 70%. I think normally it's like 80, if not 85, and increases Holy Shock healing by additional 5% for every 5 seconds that Light of the Martyr is active, stacking up to 3 times. While below 70% health, the light starts to heal you every second until you get yourself at least up to 70% health. Another ability that got adjusted here is the Blessing of Summer. The rest of the blessings, fall, autumn, spring, summer, all of them, all of the other blessings are about the same as they were, but Blessing of Summer is different, as when you bless an ally, you cause 20% of all healing from that ally to be converted into damage onto a nearby enemy, or 10% of all damage that the ally does to be converted into healing onto a nearby ally. So if you put it up on a strong DPS class, start doing a lot of damage, that ends up healing somebody in your group. or if you want to put it up on another healer that has a big heal window, that healing could also turn into partial damage onto nearby foes. For the spec of Protection Paladin, we barely saw any changes, and there's a couple of specs in the game that didn't really get a lot of updates, primarily both prots of the video game. But for Protection, we did see a few talent adjustments like Bastion of Light, which caused your next cast of Judgment to create 2 additional Holy Power. That's really about it. Then there's also Sanctuary, which allows you to walk out of your consecration while still holding the benefits of consecration, which is mostly a quality of life improvement. And there's some adjustments here with these talents where it gives you a damage reduction for melee damage, and this one gives you parry, but that's really about it. There's not too many changes for Protection specifically. Then we have the spec of Retribution, which gotten a few more adjustments, primarily starting with its mastery, which is a bit different. They wanted to give it a mastery that scales a bit better. Your mastery still increases holy power damage done, or holy damage done, by a certain amount based on your mastery, but also now Judgment has a chance to blast the target with light, dealing additional holy damage, and that's the part that's going to be able to scale a little bit better, is that holy damage from your Judgment. This mastery can be further upgraded with High Lord's Wrath. Mastery High Lord's Judgment is 50% more effective on Judgment and Hammer of Wrath. Judgment applies an additional stack of Greater Judgment if the effect is known. Besides this, Paladins have gotten a new way to activate wings, either as a minute wings with Might or as a 2-minute wings with Crusade, by using the talent of Radiant Glory, where essentially using Wake of Ashes activates wings for 8 seconds. This also creates an opportunity where spending Holy Power abilities, or spending Holy Power into abilities, has a chance to proc Avenging Wrath or Crusade for a few seconds. All of these scale with every talent that buffs wings, and they're going to have different values, but essentially it gives you either now a profile where you have wings every 2 minutes, for a big haymaker, or every 1 minute that's a bit more measured but still quite powerful, or you can have wings at the original power but for only a handful of seconds after a Wake of Ashes, giving you like a mini burst window every 30 seconds. So the Retribution Paladin profile is wildly different than it's ever been before. Some of the other changes we've seen is talents such as Crusading Strikes are super popular, and Templar Strike has not been able to make any kind of play whatsoever, so they're trying to buff this one a little bit. It now becomes a 2-part combo, and it does quite a lot more damage, significantly more damage. It does Holy Strike damage, and the first part is just instant damage. Second one is even more damage, but also has a damage over time burn effect to it. And if you can chain a bunch of Templar Slashes, which is the dot aspect of it, those could actually kind of carry over into one another. But there's certain talents such as Burn to Ash which actually amplify your dot effects by quite a bit, so I wonder if there could be an opportunity for you to be able to create some kind of like an AoE burst window, maybe with some cleave potential like Blessed Champion, in order to make certain abilities like that a little bit stronger. To help Paladins do a little bit more cleave damage instead of being fully single target or fully AoE, other talents such as Judge, Jury, and Executioner have been adjusted, where Holy Power generating abilities have a chance to cause the next final verdict to hit an additional 3 targets at 80% effectiveness. This allows Retribution Paladins to be able to try to create a more of a middle ground build, where Paladins, even after all the changes and reworks, are still having to choose between full AoE or full single target, but they've given them a couple options, plus also a lot more cleavage benefits like Blessed Champion, and there's a couple of more elements right here with auto attacks, so Crusader Strike damage increases that can kind of play into Art of War, but they're trying to do whatever they can in order to give Paladins a bit more room to have flexibility in builds, which is exciting. Another talent that's also available that's a very, very different gameplay is a 2-minute version of Divine Hammer. If you ever played Death Knight, you ever played Breath of Zaragoza, which is a playstyle that starts consuming your resources, getting hungrier and hungrier, but the longer you can channel it, and the longer you can maintain it, the more damage it does. That's essentially what Divine Hammer is. With this ability, it starts to have these Divine Hammers spinning around the character, eating away at your holy power with every single strike. So you want to start generating holy power as efficiently as possible as those hammers are eating away at your holy power. Those hammers do speed up faster and faster and faster, which does mean that you'll need to spam out your abilities to generate holy power more efficiently. It takes a little bit of time to get used to Divine Hammers, but it's quite effective in pure AoE. I'm still a little bit weird about the whole 2-minute cooldown that it has, because it's kind of difficult to line it up, especially with Paladins getting, away from the 2-minute window with Radiant Glory, but it's an interesting choice, and it's an interesting talent that has quite a bit of skill expression. Lastly, for Retribution, you'll have to choose between Shield of Vengeance or Aegis of Protection. Either you could have Divine Protection be a stronger cooldown, or spec into Shield of Vengeance that kind of try to remove some of the defenses out of Retribution, or at least trying to get you to reinvest a talent point just to maintain a Shield of Vengeance, it seems. Moving on to the class of Priest, we don't see too many changes over in the class talent tree, though we did see a removal of Mind Games completely out of the core tree. Mind Games becomes a PvP talent. If that is what you want to play, you'll only be able to use it within PvP, but it is replaced with a couple of other different options to hopefully make up the difference. Things such as Cauterizing Shadows. Whenever Shadow Word Pain or Purge the Wicked expires or is refreshed with less than 5 seconds remaining, a nearby ally within 46 yards is healed for a portion of all damage. Is healed for a set number that likely scales with int as well as other stats. Is healed for a set amount. Further below that, we have Manipulation, where you take 2% less damage from enemies afflicted by Shadow Word Pain or Purge the Wicked, which gives you some more defense, and Phantom Reach, which increases the range of most spells by 15 yards, which seems like it might be kind of okay, but it essentially turns a 40-yard range into a 46-yard range. This could be good in certain situations such as PvP or maybe PvE situations where you can outrange certain enemy mechanics or abilities, so there may be some value in this, but they generally end up adjusting abilities to make sure that there isn't too much outranging potential, though you never know. Maybe Priest will be able to utilize this plus together with Fade in order to create themselves a bit of a range gap. And lastly, the ability of Power Word Life has been amped by 15%, making it a little bit easier to use overall. As for the Disciple Priest, we don't see too many talent changes. You'll notice that the spec tree is for the most part the same, though there have been some minor adjustments primarily with your cooldowns. They wanted to make sure Rapture is exceptionally powerful, so they amplified the ability quite a bit, where Rapture will immediately shield a ally with Power Word Shield, and your next 3 Power Word Shields will have no cooldown and absorb 80% additional damage to make it a little bit better in some of the smaller 5-man content. Another cooldown they want to empower is Luminous Barrier, which generally loses out compared to Power Word Barrier being a much greater defensive ability, though they wanted to make Luminous Barrier better, at least in 5-man content, where they ended up increasing the value of this ability by 400% for smaller groups, with this number decreasing the more allies you add to the table, essentially returning it back to its original value at a 40-man raid scene. As for the spec of Holy Paladin, you are for the most part mostly the same, though the ability of your Divine Hymn, very similar to Disc Priest, has also been upgraded to be 400% more effective in smaller group content. The Shadow Priest has also seen only a handful of changes in terms of its overall talent tree identity and its class playstyle, though there have been some quality of life improvements, such as a choice between Shadow Crash or Shadow Crash, which is now same name. It used to be a different icon and a different name, but it essentially either allows you to have a Shadow Crash where you select where you want the Shadow Crash ability to go, or you select a more targeted homing missile type of Shadow Crash that will follow your target even if they move, making Shadow Crash a little bit easier to land in certain situations. Then the ability of Mind Flay itself has been adjusted a little bit, where Mind Flay now has a bit of a different timing for its tick rate. So they've adjusted the ability so that it does damage every half a second instead of every 0.75 seconds, which allows you. They also adjusted the insanity generation for this ability to scale with it as well. This makes it a bit easier for you to cancel Mind Flay at different intervals, which is mostly an adjustment when it comes to min-maxing and PvE content. Lastly, the ability of Void Torrent has been amplified by 30% to help it prepare for the hero talents, where when weaving it together with a Void Weaver, it ends up being quite a hugely impactful ability. Up next, we have the class of Rogue, where we've seen a few Rogue general talent tree adjustments. One of the more important ones and more notable ones is going to be Acrobatic Strikes, which no longer increases your range of your attacks, making you more of a melee class than ever before, but instead it just increases your auto attack speed as you keep auto attacking the target. So when you get close, start auto attacking, you end up ramping it up by 10% additional auto attack speed. Speaking of auto attacks, Cut to the Chase is now a passive that's available for every single spec of Rogue, where Dispatch, Eviscerate, or Envenom will now extend the duration of your Slice and Dice by a few seconds per combo point spent, so Rogue should almost never have to refresh the Slice and Dice ever again. Lastly, from the general changes, Shadow Dance is now a Subtlety Rogue only ability, which means that rogues no longer have access to it as a cooldown. But instead, what they gave you is 2 points of Subterfuge down here close to the capstones, and then a second Vanish if that's what you want to play with. More of a utilitarian choice rather than an offensive choice, which can be useful for certain specs and is mandatory for some like Outlaw, but definitely a little bit of a weaker choice compared to the original Shadow Dance placement. From there on, we get the spec of Assassination, which didn't really see too many overall core changes. However, there are some new talents that you will appreciate. Things such as Rapid Injection allow Envenom to deal 10% increased damage while your Envenom buff is active, which is mostly comes down to the management of energy and trying to maximize that Envenom window and trying to refresh it right as it's about to fall off, which is quite a skillful type of gameplay expression. You also have things such as Deeper Stratagem or Sanguine Stratagem making their way onto the talent tree. This combined together with Deeper Stratagem allows Assassination to have maximum 7 common points that you can now store, increasing the value of your overall finishers. Serrated Bone Spike is now a passive node that can be activated by pressing Rupture. Every time you press Rupture, you now toss out a Bone Spike, and the Bone Spike ability still remains all the same benefits it had before. So the additional damage that ends up scaling and the constant bleed, that stays the same. Common point building that adds up, adding up, the more Bone Spikes you have active also ends up being the same. And every 30 seconds you get a charge of Bone Spike, which allows you to replan the Bone Spike, which means that you'll want to be a little bit more careful when you press Rupture on enemies, because now that Rupture is now going to come with free common points, which does allow you a little bit more of an active gameplay when it comes to spending those common points specifically. The last thing worth noting is Kingsbane, which has actually been kind of nerfed. Now there's a bit of a cap on Kingsbane's overall damage, which previously didn't really have a real cap, but there was like a hidden cap that was super high. The now capped its damage increases down to 1000% maximum, so there is a bit of an adjustment there. They did increase the overall damage of Kingsbane, but this ability has a much bigger cap in terms of just its effectiveness and that it can do at its full power, which is going to be a noticeable change for those of you that love playing into big Kingsbane windows. As for the spec of Outlaw, we saw a ton of other adjustments, such as the mastery being amplified by 24%. Outlaw's mastery is not really a stat that we invest into, but maybe the damage buff might be at least a damage bonus. Adrenaline Rush is another ability that also saw a huge amount of adjustments. Previously, the ability has had passive global cooldown reduction scaling on its own that reduces the global cooldown of all your abilities that made the spec play so much faster and so much more active. But now the changes, so now it needs haste in order to scale with that global cooldown recovery. So now Outlaw rogues will have to invest a considerable amount of stat into haste in order to have Adrenaline Rush be as effective as it was before. Besides this, certain talents have saw slight additional positional changes, such as where Blade Rush has been moved to the side, where you essentially never almost pick the talent, but also Killing Spree is now in a spot where you're more likely to actually spec into it as an ability finisher. Besides this, we saw adjustments with things such as Asapper Sleeve, which can now grant you 4 common points refund instead of 5. Count the Odds as a buff now has a 10% chance to grant you a random buff from Roll the Bones that lasts for 8 seconds, which is an improvement. Underhanded Upper Hand does no longer require Blade Flurry to be used in single target because of the Slice and Dice change, though Underhanded Upper Hand is still really good in AoE content. Crackshot as an ability has been nerfed, however, where Between the Eyes now procs a free dispatch. That dispatch has been reduced from 75% effectiveness down to 50% effectiveness. And for Outlaw specifically, and the crack shot and the cooldown reduction and double vanish versus vanish and shadow dance, you actually will notice that your uptime of Adrenaline Rush is going to be considerably lower than before, unless you have enough haste, and then it more or less should be close enough. So you may want to invest points into haste on your gear immediately. As for the spec of Subtlety, we saw barely any changes. For the most part, this spec remains relatively the same and only sees upgrades as you get Deathstrucker and Trickster hero talents. However, some adjustments have been made for Subtlety, very few, like Talent of Premeditation, where after entering stealth, your next common point generating ability will generate full common points instantly. This can be used to either use Vanish, Shadow Strike to get full common points for an instant finisher, or as you Shadow Strike in the opener, you will then send it into a Slice and Dice and then never have to update Slice and Dice ever again. Another set of talents that have been adjusted is Invigorating Shadow Dust, which have been reduced in their value on the blue post. However, over on the beta, this has never really went through, so they may end up kind of going against this change, where Invigorating Shadow Dust went from like 15 seconds, 30 second, 2 common points down to like what? However, that's more of a blue post update than anything. Invigorating Shadow Dust nerf hasn't actually ever went live on the beta, and it's been really difficult to gauge if that is something that's gonna be on PT, on pre-patch rather. So if you do end up seeing this being nerfed, that was the intended mechanic. Though if it is a nerf, then maybe they either forgot about it, or it was intended to not be nerfed going forward. Then we have the class of Shaman, which has got to be one of the most exciting classes so far. Their class challenge trees for the most part the same, but there's a couple of new talent options here and there, like new talents that upgrade your Frost Shock, a new way to create a buff value out of your healing stream or cloudburst, depending if you're resto or elemental enhancement. Your position of ancestral guidance is in a much better spot now. Your thunderstorm can now be upgraded with a new ability called traveling storms. Not only can you knock enemies up with Thunder Shock, but now you can go Traveling Storm, where you can select an ally, use them as the target of a Thunderstorm, and use that knockback off of that target in order to make this a little bit easier to play into. Then you also have a new defensive of Stone Bulwark Totem, which allows the Bulwark to essentially give you a big shield off the bat immediately, and then it gives you a little bit of this additional shielding afterwards. It's mostly used as an immediate shielding rather than the subsequent shielding that happens afterwards, but it still is a decent defensive to be added into your totem gameplay. Certain totems like Earth Grab Totem and your Wind Shear Totem are separated. Wind Shear can be upgraded with shorter cooldown or better effectiveness, plus removal of snares, which is so nice. Your Enhance Imbues can empower your Imbues for enhancement, but also resto and even elemental. And Season Winds gives you an extra defensive whenever you interrupt casts. You actually take less damage from that type of cast, depending on that spell's skull. From there, we move on to Elemental Shaman, which has gotten a lot of quality of life improvements as well as thematic adjustments in talents. First things first, you get to select between Earth Shock and Elemental Blast off the bat, which can help you figure out what type of a playstyle you're going to focus on from the get-go. Then from there, you can also upgrade Earthquake either as the original, you get to place it where you want to, or an Earthquake that you choose which enemy you put it under. So that's also very exciting. Thematically, you can go full lightning build as elemental or invest heavily into lightning with things such as Flash of Lightning, which increases the crit chance of lightning bolt and chain lightning, but also gives you a bit of that cooldown reduction, which isn't new, that's an older talent. A newer talent will be Storm Frenzy, where chain lightning, Tempest, which is a new ability you won't be able to direct during pre-patch, and Lightning Bolt has a reduced cast after casting Earth Shock, Ele Blast, or Earthquake. Further down, you can increase the effectiveness of nature abilities with Lightning Conduit. While Lightning Shield is active, nature damage is increased by 8%. You can further amplify it with more procs of Thunderstrike Ward, where you get to imbue your shield every time you cast Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning. There's a chance you may call down a Thunderstrike upon your target. If you want to go really fully Lightning build with Stormkeeper, you can then go into Fury of the Storms, where now every Stormkeeper summons a Lightning Elemental by your side, so you can now become a full Lightning God. Although if you want to be more of an elementalist, you could always invest into Ice Fury, which now procs off of your Lava Burst, so you don't necessarily always have Ice Fury available. You have to Lava Burst, and then your Frost Shock is transformed into Ice Fury. Does a ton of damage, generates a lot of Maelstrom, and then cause your Frost Shocks to be more effective. Then you can take the talent of Fusion of Elements, where after casting Ice Fury, when you cast a nature and a fire spell that follows afterwards, you additionally cast an Ele Blast for free at 60% effectiveness. When you play with talents such as Echoes of the Great Sundering, that's a very effective talent. Hell, even if you take a Fusion of Elements and you pick, let's say, Earth Shock, you can still get free Elemental Blast, even if you end up talenting into Earth Shock specifically. You could also become more of an elementalist, as in fighting with your elementals, as in the pets that you get to summon, and you can empower them further. With Elemental Unity, Storm Ele buffs you nature damage, while Fire Ele buffs you fire damage. You can have those elementals be out for a little bit longer with Everlasting Elements duration increase. When those elementals fade, you get the Echo of Elements, where you summon a smaller version of those elementals. If those elementals are primal elementalists, then they actually are empowered by 80%, and even the smaller elementals gain that value. You could also invest heavily into Ascendance as a talent. Normally Ascendance gets kind of like varied uses depending on the situation, but you can actually make it a very core of your playstyle, either with First Ascendant to reduce its cooldown from 3 minutes to 2 minutes, or Preeminence, where during your Ascendance you essentially have like a mini Bloodlust with additional haste and a longer duration. Now you can also pair Ascendance together with Deeply Rooted Elements, which really helps capitalize on that familiar or that playstyle to really give that full Elementalist Ascendance build a run for its money. And besides this, you have a lot of other familiar talents that have been around for a while now for Elemental Shaman, like Primordial Wave and all the different fire synergies. Elemental Shaman also got a new mastery, where its whole overload effect has been greatly diminished. Lightning Bolt, Tempest, Elemental, Ice Fury, all these abilities have a much smaller chance to trigger a second time. So it's going to be harder to really get that much mastery where you're getting constant Overload procs. However, mastery also increases all elemental and physical damage depending on your mastery value. Physical primarily for the Earthquake, which actually deals physical damage, like your only ability deals physical damage, but it does give you a better scaling mastery that you can now further invest into because it just increases your overall value, and it makes certain talents and specking into Overload specifically to get more chances a lot more notable. Like, it has a bit more of that scaling potential where you can now branch out based on their stats. As Enhancement Shaman, you did not get a lot of changes this time around. You don't have the Wind Fury totem, but since you have the Wind Fury buff of Sky Fury. Oh, actually, I probably should mention it right here because I completely forgot about it. Yeah, Shamans also get a raid buff. I probably should have mentioned it in the general section, but yeah, Wind Fury is no longer a thing because all Shamans, Elemental and Resto, all get Sky Fury. I probably should have put this earlier, but here we are. So Sky Fury provides your allies with 2% mastery gain. That value is a little different depending on each class, but roughly 2 mastery increase worth of stats. But also everybody in your raid, everybody in your party, all of them have a chance to have their auto attacks hit a second time. So that's really exciting, but it does leave enhancement with one less button for you to press. Now you're probably going to invest a talent point into Flurry, since Flurry went from class talent tree into spec tree. Though the rest of the spec talents haven't really gone through a lot of changes whatsoever. They are getting modified through all the hero talents, but that's going to take a bit of time before you get to play with those. As for Restoration, you're for the most part roughly the same. You do have a couple of new talents here and there, like you no longer have Stormkeeper as a playstyle, and Acid Rain gets to move up a little bit in the rows. You do have some more crit synergy with White Water. Your critical heals have a 215% effectiveness instead of usual 200% if you end up investing heavily into critical strikes. From there on, for the most part, your capstones is the only place that really we've seen a lot of changes. Well, I guess there is one with Master of the Elements. I guess I forgot the best part, where casting Lava Burst increases the healing of your next healing surge by 30%, stacking up to 2 times. Great for burst healing, great for spot healing, and focus healing one singular ally. Also, healing surges apply Flame Shock to a nearby enemy when empowered by this effect, so you can spread Flame Shocks easily just by healing and pumping out a bunch of Lava Bursts and then healing your allies. Love that, like, elemental twisting synergy. From there on, we have updates to Earth and Harmony with the new talent of Reactive Warding. Essentially, when you reapply a Earth Shield on an ally, depending on how many charges you're refreshing of Earth Shield, they actually get a heal. Same thing goes for your Water Shield. If you're missing charges and you reapply the ability, it actually grants you additional mana, which is kind of nice. The playstyle of Ascendance gets very similar benefits to Elemental Shaman with the talents such as First Ascendant and Preeminence, so you can empower it even further and keep it together with deeply rooted elements, but for Resto, that's not all that new. For Resto, we also have a talent of Downpour, where after casting Healing Rain, it has a 100% chance to activate Downpour, allowing you to cast Downpour within 12 seconds, where you do a burst of water at the Healing Rain's location, doing a bunch of healing for your allies while increasing the max health by 10%. And from there, we have some adjustments with Primal Core, which goes into Tide Waters and Primordial, or can go into Undercurrent and then goes into Downpour, with slight adjustments when it comes to positions of certain talents. When it comes to the class of Warlock, we're also seeing some adjustments in the class talent tree, primarily with them trying to remove a lot of the performance talents out of the class tree and move them into the spec tree. For the most part, you're only seeing a few talents that are going to be performance-based, like Sargeria Technique and Sarkarthal Guile. They also added a couple of new talents, especially in the capstones, in order to give Warlocks more utility. Things such as Pact of Gluttony, which gives you a different type of Healthstone. Normally, when you use a Healthstone, it goes on a cooldown, and you can't start the cooldown of Healthstone until you get out of combat. But for Warlocks, their specific Healthstones, the demonic Healthstones, will immediately start going on cooldown to come back a little bit quicker. Then we have talents such as Swift Artifice, which reduces the cast time of Soulstone and create Healthstone by 50%, make it a little bit faster if you need to rest somebody. We did see one performance talent added, Demonic Tactics, but it's mostly to support a more crit-based gameplay for all 3 specs. Your spells have a 5% increased chance to deal critical strike damage, or you also have, you gain 10% more critical strike stat from all sources. From there on, we see some adjustments to the specs such as Affliction, Demonology, and Destruction, where we see a restructure of their entire talent tree. There's a lot to take a look at in terms of the actual talents. There's a couple of new options here and there, but for the most part, they're adjusting Affliction, primarily, to function off of Malefic Rapture over everything else as your primary soul shard spender. So, abilities such as Seed of Corruption are not your AoE ability, rather it's a payload to spread corruptions everywhere. From there on, once you get all the dots on everybody, you spam in Malefic Rapture in all situations. Single target, AoE, everything. So, Malefic Rapture does end up becoming a little bit easier to use when it comes to Affliction Warlocks going forward. From there on, we got a couple of new talents. There's a lot of different cool, fun options, such as a Cleave Shadowbolt with Cunning Cruelty. As you use Shadowbolts or as you cast Rain Soul, you can send a Shadowbolt volley at multiple targets, which is very exciting. Your dots also get a little bit more crit potential with Malediction, increasing crit chance of all your basic dots like Agony, Corruption, and Stable Affliction, or crit damage with Contagion up to 30% more. So there's some more value with that crit Affliction Warlock gameplay, if you ask me. Haunt can be further augmented with additional damage and be faster to cast, plus it applies Shadow's Embrace if you choose to play it. But also Drain Soul is not the only ability most Warlocks are going to spec into. A lot of players have been playing Improved Shadowbolt. Casting Shadowbolts as an Affliction feels weird, but it can do a lot of damage, and there's quite a lot of synergy to support that type of a playstyle, so that is an option. Dark Lair can also be upgraded with Malevolent Visionary, where you can increase his damage, but also he can do AoE damage to multiple enemies at once, which is also plenty exciting. Capstones such as your Soul Rod can be further upgraded with Malign Omen, which allows you to increase the damage of Malefic Rapture, plus Malefic extends debuffs plus Haunt by a couple of seconds every time you use it. Then it goes into Dark Harvest, which is more familiar. A lot of these other talents you're actually going to find to be very, very familiar, as they're basically the same talents as before, though Oblivion is a new one, which is like a huge drain of a bunch of shadow damage over 3 seconds, costs 2 whole soul shards, 45-second cooldown, and you'll deal additional damage up to 30% more for every single dot that you have on that target, so it's quite nice, quite bursty. Talents such as Ravenous Affliction also play around with crits and dots, which gives you more Nightfall procs, which can be really good for that improved Shadowbolt build. You can also get more resources out of your Agonies, and your Malefic Rapture can be better at cleaving multiple targets. As a Demonology Warlock, we are seeing some new thematic elements, but also some resource reductions, like the ability of Demonic Chords. You're not going to be able to get nearly as many, and there is going to be a pretty hefty reduction in how many of those you can get now. So Demonology Warlock is going to be less mobile, which isn't the worst, but it does make him a little bit less good at the whole movement while casting. You are going to be casting a lot more Shadowbolts, and that's where they have Rune of Shadows, which increases your damage over your pets, but also reduces the casting of Shadowbolt by 25% and increases the damage by 40%. So you are going to be a little bit more of a turret as the Demonology Warlock, which is unfortunate, but it still is quite a lot of resources you can send out quite regularly. But also timing your power siphon during key moments is also going to be a lot more important. Just be aware you're not going to be swimming in resources in demonic procs, core procs as much. From there on, most of the talents are kind of spread together to be a bit more thematic. Imp talents with imps, doggo talents with doggos, and even your Felguard talents are kind of more put together. A lot of these are going to be familiar up until this row right here, where there's a lot of cool capabilities to how you can augment your builds. You can get Doom back, which is a tier set version of Dragonflight for Demonology Warlock Doom, where your Demon Bolts that consume Demonic Core will apply impending Doom on a target. As you get more Demonic Core procs and spend them, you actually can reduce how fast this dot is going to tick, and when it ticks out, it does a ton of damage with AoE components. You can either speed this dot up with Doom Eternal, or cause a Doom to deal more damage and summon a Wild Imp when it expires. There's also a chance when Doom expires to summon a Doom Guard to your side. This guy only single targets for now, but maybe by the time it comes out for pre-patch, maybe he'll have some AoE components, but it's a very fun talent that just kind of lets you play around Doom mechanic. Then we have Summon Vile Fiend, which can be used to either empower the Vile Fiend itself so that it can increase its damage by 20% and apply a Wicked Maw against the target. Wicked Maw being a debuff that can apply from your Demon Doggos that causes the enemies to take 20% more Shadow Flame damage from your spells and abilities for the next 12 seconds. You can also upgrade the actual bile of this ability to be Shadow Touch, where the Wicked Maw causes the target to take 20% additional shadow damage from all demons. There's a handful of demons that do shadow damage, but Vile Fiend can actually become one of them, because you can upgrade Vile Fiend, turn him into a Gloomhound, where his melee attacks will deal additional shadow damage, and you'll just be a lot more effective. But if you need an AoE version of this demon, you can always turn him into the Charhound, which has more of this radiating fire AoE damage, which is also quite exciting. If you end up playing around with Vile Fiend heavily and you go Hammermaster's Gambit, Dreadstalkers can actually be empowered while Vile Fiend is active, and you can improve those Dreadstalkers more with Flame Touch, increasing attack speed and critical strike chance by 10 and 15%. If you instead want to invest a lot of your time into your main Felguard, your primary pet, you can always go to Untorn Armaments, pick up Improved Demonic Tactics, increasing primary pet's Felguard's critical strike chance equal to a portion of yours, plus also critical strike chance from your spells and demons is increased by 4% with Demonic Brutality. And then you can empower them with Immutable Hatred or Guillotine, but those talents are not really necessarily new. Lastly, we have ourselves the spec of Demonology, which has also gone through quite a restructure with its talents, another flavorful change that actually gives you a lot more talents to really invest your points in any way you want to. And this one really gets fun when you start really crafting around and playing around with different builds and trying to invest talents in different areas, because it gives you quite a lot of talents to spend everywhere you need, while letting you pick up the basics like your Havocs, your Backdrafts, your Roaring Blazes, your Cataclysms, and even enough to give you a Summon Infernal baseline 2-minute cooldown that can be further upgraded with Crushing Chaos or Reign of Chaos. Even talents such as Channel Demon Fire, which can be seldom played, can actually be supported heavily with things such as Raging Demon Fire, giving those Demon Fire procs extension on your immolation, while also adding additional damage, plus Demon Fire Mastery, which increases damage, but also letting you channel quicker. Hell, even abilities such as Shadowborn are getting more support, with things such as Blistering Atrophy, which increases damage, but also the crit chance when the enemies are low. And when you do use a Shadowborn on an enemy that is low for an execute value and it doesn't kill the enemy, it actually refunds some of its cooldown, so you can kind of spam out a bunch of Shadowburns back to back with basically 100% crit chance thanks to Blistering Atrophy. Then we also got a couple of passive talents that are like really small updates, but like quality of life improvements, like Indiscriminate Flames, which Backdraft increases the damage of your next Chaos Bolt and increases the critical strike chance of your next Incinerate or Soulfire, so more resources or more damage. Ember Storm increases the damage done by your fire spells and reduces the casting of your Incinerate by 20%. You have Devastation, which increases your crit chance, and then Ruin, which increases crit damage. And then we have our capstones. Capstones such as Soulfire are kinda decent on their own, but can be made even better with Decimation, where crits have a chance to empower next Soulfire, resetting its cooldown, causing it to cast 80% faster, which is exciting. Abilities such as Improved Chaos Bolt are back in, increasing the damage of Bolt, but also reducing its cast time a little, as well as Burn to Ashes and Chaos Incarnate, which is caps out at 70% value. The talent of Ritual of Ruin is essentially the same, but the demon you summon at the end of it is actually now an Overfiend instead of a Blasphemy. Overfiends don't drop in and stun, they just kind of spawn on a side, but instead of being a melee, they actually end up chucking out Chaos Bolts from a distance, while also generating new Soul Shards every half a second, which is pretty cool. Then there's talents such as Power Overwhelming and Diabolic Embers, which are basically the same as they were on live. The new stuff is going to be Dimensional Rift, not necessarily the ability, but some of its upgrade talents. Like if you want Rifts to do AoE damage, Unstable Rifts give it some cleave potential. Or if you want to be able to regain charges of Rift or spawn Rifts automatically as you incinerate, Dimension Ripper can be played even without investing a point into Dimensional Rift, which may end up seeing some play if you could just stand there and turn a bunch of Incinerates or have an Incinerate focused playstyle, maybe together with Burn to Ashes, but it's an interesting combo nonetheless. So when it comes to the class of warrior, we're seeing a lot of quality of life improvements when it comes to the general talent tree, as it got restructured so you can pick up things such as Thunderclap, Shockwave, Rally, Leap, your Stormbolt, Heal, Fear, Reflect pretty easily. And there's a bunch of other talents that have also been improved too, such as Hone Reflexes, which has more of cooldown reduction for a large swath of your abilities, which is a very, very nice pick because it gives you a little bit more room to really experiment with some of the choices that you have available as a warrior. Then you also have things such as Thunderous Roar, which have been made less mandatory. It no longer grants you rage, and Thunderous Roar increases your bleeds only during the Thunderous Roar bleed, so it makes the other options a little bit more feasible. Things such as your Champion Spear, which has previously been kind of usable here and there depending on the situation. They did upgrade the Piercing Challenge to do a little more damage and a bit better in terms of rage generation, and just spearing an enemy gives you a chance to crit them more likely. You don't longer have to stand in the spear to get benefits from Champion's Might, just landing the chain even if the target moves away from it, while as long as there's a chain tethered to them, you're more likely to crit them. From there on, we do get some warrior-specific changes like the spec things such as arms. For the most part, arms warrior, a lot of your abilities now cost a lot less rage, but you also generate less rage. It's one of those things they're trying to do to make sure that arms warriors are not over generating rage and are wasting it, which is a really careful dance they gotta do to make sure you never run out. With proper play, you never run out of rage. But there are some moments I feel like if you're playing a low haste warrior, like let's say you end up leveling in this expansion and you end up getting some baseline, leveling gear, that's not going to be enough to give you a lot of rage. You'll need to pick up some haste as soon as early as possible. That being said, it at least doesn't feel that bad or that jarring compared to some of the other class changes that we've seen so far. Specific warrior changes, we have upgrade talents for Avatar, where Warlord Stormman procs Recklessness, that Recklessness has been reduced, only procs from Avatar, does not proc from Colossus Smash. Also, Blade Master Stormman is not a Blade Storm for free. It's instead a Super Strikes during Avatar, with Cleave getting shorter cooldown, so you're not going to be able to Blade Storm constantly. This is a little nicer with some of the hero talents, but it is definitely going to be a bit of a change where Avatar, you might actually want to utilize it together with Sweeping, maybe even something like Collateral Damage to get a bit more value. As for the warrior talents, most of them look about the same, but there are some adjustments, such as Cleave, which now replaces Whirlwind, while still getting all the same benefits of your Mortal Strike. This one is quite a bit to get used to, but once you do, it actually feels kind of good. It's kind of weird to have Cleave and Mortal Strike in your bars at the same time, since they essentially feels like they do the same thing. But technically you can go Cleave, Mortal Strike, Cleave with Super Strikes, and that could be, I guess, a bit of burst Cleave AoE damage. It's an interesting change, but it is one that you'll have to get used to. Talents such as Storm of Swords now allow Cleave and Whirlwind a 30% chance to make the next Cleave or Whirlwind cause 100% less rage, which can be kind of nice if you can chain that multiple times over. Certain talents such as Finishing Blows now generate more rage on enemies that are super low health, which gives you even more execute value. And then talents such as Skull Splitter no longer need to be upgraded to take out your rend and deep ones at the same time. Then, there's a new talent of Dance of Death. When an enemy dies while affected by Blade Storm, all damage deals increase by 5% for the remainder of the Blade Storm and for 2 seconds afterwards. When an enemy dies while affected by Ravager, its duration is extended by a few seconds. This effect can trigger maximum 3 times before you use a Blade Storm or Ravager. So for the most part, the arm stays mostly the same, but the rage adjustment and some of the changes that come once you get the hero talents, I feel like that's where it's going to be some of the bulk of more than noticeable changes for the spec specifically. As for the spec of Fury Warrior, they wanted to do a couple of things. They wanted to make him 1, less cooldown reliant, and 2, they wanted to adjust them where they do want to use abilities such as Bloodthirst and Rage and Blow as part of every one of their builds. So you no longer have Annihilator that annihilates Rage and Blow out of your rotation. However, they do want to give players an opportunity to play a slower Fury Warrior build, while also retaining a lot of the power. So off the bat, you really got a choice between Frenzy and Rage, which gives you a bunch of haste for a fast-paced gameplay, almost carpal tunnel inducing, or you can go for slower that doesn't grant you the haste with powerful enrage, but it does amplify your mastery, your enrage damage a little bit while also extending it. We'll see how those two work out, but at least they're trying to make some work here for this class specifically. For Fury Warrior, certain talents got adjusted like Blood Crates, which Rage and Blow increases the critical strike chance of Bloodthirst by 15% and stacks until the ability eventually critical strikes. Bladestorm and Ravager are now a choice node between the two, and Bladestorm might actually be a lot better of an option going forward, even though in previous expansions it wasn't really a good choice for Fury, but with some of the hero talents and with the talent of Unhinged, where Bladestorm and Ravager can automatically cast Bloodthirst, and the amount of damage this ability does and the rage it can generate, it might be better than Ravager, especially if you're looking for an instantaneous bursty ability, but especially good once you get the Slayer hero talent. Then, certain talents such as Reckless Abandon now support both your next Rage and Blow and Bloodthirst, so that's pretty good. Means that both those abilities can be used every time you get Reckless Abandon proc. Though if you do like playing Anger Management and for more uptime on your Recklesses, it'll be a little bit harder to do so with the nerfs to Unbridled Ferocity, where Rampage used to be 20% chance to grant you Recklesses, now it's 6% chance. Much lower chance, making it much less effective of a talent. Then we have the talent of Odin's Fury, which has gotten amped. For the most part, Onslaught is a very popular choice, even Tenderized, but they're really trying to make Odin's Fury competitive without you having to dip into Mountain Blade. So this ability deals a ton more damage now, and it might actually be very strong if you're looking to play Fury as a bursty class. Besides this, major aspects of Fury's kit base abilities have all been amplified by quite a bit to make sure that Fury Warriors can play into some of their talents that are passive empowerments for certain abilities, where you can play into playstyle that's a little bit more sustained focus, so you don't have to nearly rely on cooldowns to be hyper effective as the spec. And for the spec of protection, we don't see a lot of changes. For the most part, you only really get one major one, and that is Fight Through the Flames as a talent. The rest of your talent tree is about the same as it was. Fight Through the Flames, the way it works is defensive stance now additionally reduces magic damage you take by 6 additional percent. That's really about it. And the rest of your kit largely remains for the most part untouched. That is, there's an opportunity that maybe this could be adjusted at some point in the future, but for the most part, yeah, Prot Warriors doesn't seem to be going through too many changes, very similar to Protection Paladin we discussed earlier. Now, it's been a very long time since I've done a video as long as this, so if you are watching the end part right here, which I don't know how many of you will get to this part specifically, but if you are here, I really do want to appreciate you guys for watching this video, and I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did like it, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. Also, join our Discord, link to that down in the description below, but I'm gonna peace out, render this thing as fast as I can. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.